Hey, welcome everybody. Okay, got a bunch of noises going on there. Hopefully, figured all that out. Anyways, okay, so let me kind of set the stage for this a little bit. Usually, some people will watch something and then kind of ask, "What is going on? I'm getting all these noises here." Something in Streamlabs. But somebody will watch something and then occasionally have me kind of weigh in on it. And this particular video, one of my mods had found and asked me to watch, and I haven't quite been the same ever since. But I watched this the other day, and usually when I attack one of these types of videos, I take several days to do it. This one I only had about 24 hours to prepare, and I got to tell you, there's a lot to this, and so I hope I didn't bite off more than I can chew, so to speak. I'm going to try to address what I think are some of the issues in this particular video, but I want to make it very clear right off the top, right, that I do not want anybody to think that it has anything to do with any kind of personal thing against Aron Ra. I know he has a huge following, and I know a lot of them probably might come over and watch this. I don't think I have no delusion whatsoever that he's going to watch it, but he might have people that follow him watch, and it's hopefully for them to kind of show where I think Aron made some major mistakes. But I don't want people to think this is personal. I miss Aron. I got to tell you, I mean, he was a friend of mine, and we used to get along very well, and we have a lot in common. We have a lot of the same goals, right? We have a lot of the same beliefs. I mean, when it comes to things like young creationism, he basically literally wrote the book on disproving and debunking young creationism. So we kind of have a lot in common there, and it's kind of a shame the way things ended up. I think a lot of it was fostered by other people having a lot of negativity between us, but I'm one of those people when I believe very strongly that I'm correct, and I have the evidence, and I have the logic, and I have the reason, I have the documentation. I'm not going to bow down to anybody. I'm not going to kowtow to anybody, especially somebody of a prominent stature that is putting out misinformation, because then they have not just a handful of people that they're misleading, but a bunch of people that they're misleading, right? And so this is one of those things where I think Aron is misleading a lot of people in the facts that he puts out. They aren't facts because they're wrong, so they can't be facts, which we'll get into. But I kind of wanted to kind of dive into this particular video because it really showed, in a nutshell, why Aron should not be having these types of philosophical discussions. Okay, he comes from a scientific background. I love science. He loves science. All you guys in the live chat probably love science, right? So we're not people that are anti-science. But unfortunately, he takes his understanding of science and he tries to translate it over to philosophy, and it doesn't really comport. It doesn't really just kind of transfer over, because in science, most of it is dealt with evidential things as far as empiricism, right? As far as observations and demonstrations, and hey, you have a theory, you need to go support it, you need to show evidence for it, you need to show the scientific community, hey, look, you think that Einstein's theory of relativity is wrong, you think evolutionary theory is wrong, it's up to you to demonstrate that to the scientific community. Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? But in philosophy, it's a little bit different. And so he kind of takes that approach, that his understanding of science by fiat carries over. And I'm going to kind of explain why. But anyways, I'm going to dive in this video here. I do want to let people again know, don't think this is anything personal. It's not. I think it has to do more along the lines of, if Aron has very poor foundations, right, of his beliefs when it comes to philosophy, and he misunderstands a lot of the concepts, and any discussion he gets into with any kind of theist, it's gonna be bad. It's not going to end very well for him. A lot of it is, I think, that even if he has the right conclusions, right, it doesn't really matter if his justifications for those conclusions are not reasonable or not rational. One of the things I talk about very often is things like 0.99 repeating equals 1. And I think when you guys listen to this, think of it this way. Even if Aron is correct, even if you are an atheist and you believe there are no gods, or even if you just, are agnostic and you don't have a belief, think about it this way. If Aron were to say 0.99 repeating equals 1 is true, but because they're close enough, right? So he has a little caveat, 0.99 repeating equals 1 because they're close enough. He got the answer right, but the justification wrong, right? So when it comes to this evidentialism that we're going to be discussing, or what they're going to be discussing in this video, it's more along the lines of, are you justified to hold a particular position, right? Not the conditions for justification, but are you justified? And in that particular case, even though he got the math right, he would be not justified because his justificatory conditions are incorrect. So I think that's kind of where we're going to approach this from. So, he's when it comes to the science, this works. By the way, look, I'm justified to believe the Earth is it's not 7,000 years old. I'm justified to believe it's 4.5 billion years old, just like Aron. Why? Because we have scientific evidence that supports that. And in science, that's what the justification is. What can you demonstrate? What can you have a consilience of all these different branches of science that show the Earth is really old rather than really young? I mean, because in order for it to be really young, all the data points would have to be wrong, right? Every branch of science would have to be incorrect. So the probability of it being young is very low. Is it impossible? No. It's not a logical impossibility. It's just very, 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 very minute to the point of absurdity. So it absolutely is justified to believe that the Earth is old. The justification conditions and the justificatory reasons for why you believe something, philosophically speaking, don't have to be based on empiricism. And I think that Aron gets locked into that mindset. It has to be empiricism. So anyways, we're going to hopefully watch this video. He's there for about an hour. I'm going to be stopping it every so often. I have a ton of notes, even though, like I said, I usually take a few days to kind of go over this stuff. I hope you guys can help me out because there's a lot to talk about here. But to set this up, he went on a podcast. And the podcast is called the Thought Adventure Podcast, and it's with three theists. They are Muslim, and all three of them have a pretty good handle of philosophy from my layperson's point of view. And spoilers, they're basically running the argument from contingency with Aron in this. Okay, so I'm sure he's heard these arguments before. He doesn't quite understand them. He doesn't understand ontological or cosmological arguments, and so when they're laying their groundwork for why they believe God exists, this is what they're at. I mean, the question was, does a necessary being exist? And they're laying the groundwork of why do they think that proposition is true. And Aron just isn't understanding why they're starting at the foundations. And I respect these guys for that. I really do. They're starting at the very basic and saying, this is why we believe that this proposition, that a necessary being exists. And Aron just wants to get into okay, you believe that a necessary being exists. You call that necessary being God. Show me God kind of thing. He wants that he wants to dump into the deep end. He wants the meat without any of the work to get there, right? And that's not how it works in philosophy. It doesn't. You don't have to say, I believe God exists. Here's God, and there, check him out and observe it. But this is what he wants. He wants it served to him on a silver platter. Here's God, observe it. And that's not how it's done in philosophy. But I respect the guys for, like I said, having the fundamentals to explain to him why they at least think that they're justified to believe that a metaphysical being exists. I think they do smuggle a few things in here and there. We'll get to that. But all in all, Aron wasn't understanding any of this, and so let's see what you guys think. So hopefully you guys can hear this. I'm going to play this and let me know as soon as I do if you guys hear it. I got to tell you, I started from the very beginning of the discussion, right? And I already started. I think Aron looks defeated. This is me. He looks like he's already bored out of his mind. He doesn't want to be there, and he just knows that he's just not going to have a good time, right? So let me know if you guys can hear this.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us once again in the Thought Adventure podcast. Today, we have a very special episode where we'll be talking to our guest here, Aron Ra, about whether a necessary being exists. Aron is an extremely well-known atheist. He's an activist. He's a podcaster. He has a YouTube channel where he discusses a lot of topics about religion, philosophy, atheism, science, and we're hoping this is going to be a good discussion. Good to have you here, Aron.
Thank you much.
And to the panelists, assalamu alaikum. How's it going?
Wa alaikum salam.
Now, Aron, maybe you can give us like a brief intro about yourself, what you do, your views, and then we can get right into it.
Well, I'm a secular advocate. I'm an activist advocating for science, secular science and education, and also secular policies in politics, which, of course, in the United States of late has been quite a challenge.
And let me kind of stop there. Again, I'm going to be pausing quite a bit, so deal with it. And I want to keep this down to 2.5 hours. He is there for an hour, and so there's a lot of stuff to cover. But I think this is important because I happen to agree with Aron on this, right? We are both secularists. Both of us want religion out of schools. Both of us want evolution to be taught properly. We think that it's nonsensical to say teach the controversy, right? There's no controversy when it comes to young Earth creationism. It's wrong, period. Now, I do know a lot of young earthers, and I'm very cordial with them, right? I mean, people got upset that I happen to be friends, so to speak, with Dr. Sarfati. Look, he's never done me wrong. He can be quite belligerent, don't get me wrong. I've seen him in action. But he ain't that way to me. And why antagonize him? And, if I ever want to have a civil discussion with him about young earth creationism, he's more likely to now than he ever would, 6 or 7 years ago before I started talking to him. So I don't see a reason to like go after every single young earth creationist you meet kind of thing. But I made my position very clear. He knows exceptionally well that I am very anti young earth creationism. So we would agree on that, right? We would be allies in this, and we were allies in this, which again is a very hard thing to process, that I'm not friends with him any longer, which is a shame. It really is. I mean, over some silly stuff that, yes, he's wrong on. We all know he's wrong on, but he's never going to capitulate. And, that ball is in his court. I mean, if he ever realizes that he was wrong all this time and he just doesn't have a good fundamental foundation of philosophy, and he ever wants to have a conversation with me, I'm not closing that door, never will. Because he never really done anything personal against me. He just didn't viciously come after me like some other people have. He wrote a blog about me, but it was cute. Excuse me, I got a little bit of cough. Please excuse me. I'll try to mute as much as I can. I got some allergies. And I wrote a kind of a flippant response back to him. So, but like I said, I happen to like Aron. I know some people have, issues with him, but he's got a good heart. I think he really does. Anyways, formerly known as Moon for $4.99. I love you, or love you, Steve. Thank you, Moon. Hope you're well. Hope everything's good for your health, and miss having you around. Very much appreciative of your super chat. Also, I will be letting people know right off the bat here, if you want to support the channel, please, become a member in the video description, and or join and become a member to the channel. Every little bit helps. It's been really rough lately because of everything that's been going on. So yeah, I've got to shield myself a little bit. So if you really like this video and you gain something out of it at the end, become a Patreon member. $1, $5, $10, $1,000, $1 billion. I don't care. Just pick something and go with it. Every little bit helps. And then, if you become a member of the channel, you get a cool little green name too. So, all right. So let's move on here.
Cool. Okay. So, this discussion is titled, Does a Necessary Being Exist? And of course, we know it's highly unlikely that, Aron's going to come out of this discussion believing in God, or that Jake, Sharif, or I will get convinced in the opposite direction. But in order for this discussion to be as intellectually fruitful as possible, we need to structure it in a way where we can lay out, our views on the table, define our terms, and try to understand our respective epistemic frameworks and deconstruct the opposing views from there, so that we can actually try to get somewhere. So I guess, that is a difficult goal to achieve. But if we go about it in the right way, and if we sort of address the right questions and the foundations of this discussion, keeping in mind that we are coming from different frameworks, different epistemic frameworks, different worldviews, we need to try to come to as much common ground as possible, so that we can move forward with the discussion in an intellectually meaningful manner.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right on that, right? I mean, he wants to say, hey, look, we have very different viewpoints. Let's find the commonalities, and they hold his hand the entire way to get to the conclusion that they want him to get to. Now, is their argument assailable? Absolutely, right? But I mean, I don't think that at any time they're trying to manipulate Aron. I don't think they're trying to mislead Aron. I don't think they're trying to pull a Darth Dawkins with Aron. I don't think they're trying to be dishonest in any way. I saw no deception. I mean, granted, again, maybe here and there when we get into it, they may have smuggled a few things in here and there, but I don't think that was really any kind of big deal. I don't think it was like super intentional. But the point is that Aron comes into these discussions already with the mindset that he's being manipulated, right? He's being misled. These guys are theists. If you're a theist, you got to be inherently a liar, right? That's how he kind of approaches these things, because he thinks all theists are intellectually dishonest. The irony. But so I think when Abdul is saying here, obviously, is let's find the commonalities and then step by step work toward the question of, is there a necessary being? And I'm just going to say this right off the bat. Necessary being doesn't mean has to be a God. It just means some object that has some ontological presence. That's it. Now, there's a kind of a perlocutionary effect that we have when we hear the phrase necessary being, that it kind of says God, right? We've just been kind of conditioned for that. And I think Aron has as well, even though I think he does understand that necessary being doesn't necessitate a God, just something that exists that is necessary. But we're going to get into that. But I want to throw that out at the very beginning, because there seems to be a little confusion there. And again, I don't think they're trying to, I watched this whole video at the very end. We're not going to get to the part where after Aron leaves, but I watched it very closely after Aron left. And yeah, they made that very clear. They're not trying to sneak in anything. Oh, necessary being God, they didn't get that even that far afterwards. So
I guess we can start by asking Aron some questions, and I prepared some questions here so that I can try to achieve that goal. We can try to achieve that goal in the stream to the best of our ability. So I first want to ask Aron about his views. Well, is he a hard atheist, a soft atheist, agnostic, something else?
All right. Well, for the longest time, I was agnostic, in that I didn't have a belief in God, and the belief, and I left open maybe the possibility, but now I understand that there's not even a possibility, literally. And so, and all we have is evidence that God has been made up. So my belief in God is now about the same as your belief in leprechauns.
All right, a lot to unpack in that one little statement, because I think he's using agnostic the way I've always explained to him agnostic is used, right? Which is kind of odd, because he's always telling me I'm wrong with that. But be that as it may, I mean, he's right off the gate, has told people, look, I'm a hard atheist in this, because gods are impossible. That implies there are no gods, right? If gods are impossible, it would be epistemic suicide to say there are no gods, but I believe that there are, right? I mean, that's just it's obviously an epistemic contradiction there. So by saying that gods are impossible, then it does seem to imply that he is a hard atheist. And I know that he is. He's said many times, there are no gods. Look at his shirt, right? He says, the shirt says, there is no God but Allah. Just kidding. There is no God. So he's very, very open about that. He is there is no gods. And so I don't know why he does push for the whole lack of belief thing. Makes no sense to me. I mean, if he has such a strong position, why not go with that? Why lock yourself into this? Oh, well, atheism is merely a lack of belief. It makes no sense to me. It's just, to me, philosophically untenable. I have my atheist semantic collapse argument. I have my WASP argument, which I'm sure he's well aware of by now. He hasn't been able to defeat it. He hasn't gotten any philosopher to defeat them. So I don't know why he locks himself in like that. But anyways, as you guys can tell, he does hold the position there are no gods. Now, I had an atheist the other day tell me that an atheist that believes there are no gods is irrational. Yeah, what? No, that's perfectly rational if you can justify it. And I'm not sure his justifications quite work for me, but neither leave it as it may, right? He definitely believes there are no gods, right? So anybody who says, well, Aron just lack belief, no, he's a full-on there are no gods person.
It's not just that they don't exist, but they can't exist.
Okay, and this, so you're defining yourself as a hard atheist, and this is generally with regard to the proposition for, if I give you a proposition, a necessary being exists. Are you saying that you are you believe that proposition is outright false?
Right. There's no such thing as a necessary being. The better question is is God really necessary? And I don't even think that's a valid question. There's no indication of God. There's no possibility of God. It's just something we made up to feel comfortable somehow.
All right, so we're going to start off here. He says there's no necessary being. So now remember the topic, right? And does a necessary being exist? And again, this is why I said from the beginning, don't lock yourself in that mindset that a necessary being must be a God. A necessary being could be anything that is necessary that exists in all possible worlds. That's what necessary means. So when they're talking about necessary, they're saying that whatever this object is that has ontological presence must exist in all possible worlds. It cannot fail to exist. Okay. Now, of course, the theists are going to believe that it's God. Okay. But there might be some other thing. There might be some other metaphysical necessity, right? And there are different types of necessity. There's logical necessity, there's metaphysical necessity, there's nomological necessity, which like the laws of physics. There's different kinds of necessities. And again, I'm going to have principal charity. I don't think any one of these three guys were trying to mislead him or anything. But it was very clear that it was talking about a metaphysical necessity, right? Some necessary being or object that exists that cannot fail to exist. That's their discussion, okay? And basically, like I said, they're just running the argument for contingency here. It's part of Aquinas' 5 ways. We've all heard, Aquinas' 5 ways. We've all heard the ontological arguments. We've all heard argument for contingency. They're just running it straight. I don't see any even nuance on it. They're just giving him this philosophical argument.
Well, okay, since this discussion revolves around our knowledge of this specific proposition I'm putting forward here, let me ask you about your epistemology. So in your view, what are the acceptable methods out there that we possess as humans in order to come to know anything? Must it be observable? Can we infer things about the unobservable? What's your epistemology? How do you come to know things? That's going to help us know how you've come to know that this proposition is false.
Well, a lot of people will think that because they believe something is the same thing as knowing it. And that I call that the fourth foundational falsehood of creationism. You can't actually, if you can't demonstrate the accuracy of your claims to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, then you can't actually know what you merely believe. So you have to be able to show that there's some truth to it. And if you can't show that there's a truth to it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's false. It just means there's no truth you can show for it. And so you could leave open the possibility, if there is a possibility to consider, but don't allow yourself to be convinced by it. You have to show me that there's a there there.
All right. So right off the bat, he's asked a very fair question about his epistemology, and straight off, Aron starts running script. This is just straight rhetoric that he's been programmed to say a million times over. Doesn't address the question, doesn't explain his epistemological framework, doesn't explain anything about the question that was asked of him about how he interprets knowledge. Now, he could have been really simple. He's been like, look, how we acquire knowledge. I'm not a skeptic. I think we can have knowledge. I tend to justify true belief or justify true belief plus, or he could have gone to reliabilism or something about to show that, look, this is how I determine why I'm justified to believe something. He could have talked about evidentialism. He could have talked about correspondence theory of truth. He could have talked about all these different things that formulate our epistemological framework. He did none of it. It was just straight off the bat. Oh, well, theists say they believe something and they say that's knowledge, but it's not. It just blew my mind that right off the bat, he disconnected from the actual philosophical discussion to talk about something completely irrelevant about theists, maybe not being justified to claim knowledge. Well, he's making a knowledge claim here too, right? He's claiming there is no God. So he has to justify that. And I think it's a very high bar to meet. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I don't think in any way, shape, or form, Aron is anywhere close to that bar to justify a claim of knowledge, right? If you don't even have a framework from to begin with of what what you hold to be a justificatory conditions for knowledge, how can you say you have knowledge? So I just want you guys to know that this is script. This is this pre-programmed stuff. And this is a shame too, because he's not engaging at this point. And I think all three of them right here realize that, okay, this is probably not going to go very well.
Yeah, but I guess, Aron, my question was more along the lines of how do we come to the conclusion that something is real or not, provided we both think that we're approaching this from like an evidentialist, we have an evidentialist approach to this, that we believe we need to have reasons and we need to show that our beliefs are true. So what I'm asking you is, what is the epistemological framework you're committed to in, determining whether something is true or not?
What I just said. I mean, if you want to make a claim, okay, I don't care what you believe. All I care is why you believe it.
By the way, I'm going to put this at 1.5 speed only because they do talk slow and there's a lot to go through. So it sounds kind of normal at 1.5 speed. So
show me the facts and evidence that imply that indicate that is at least a possibility and at least it should be a probability. So show me that.
But how can I show it to you when you're not giving me a mean? So I agree with you in one sense that I need to provide you with evidence, or I need to show you that a certain belief that I have is more likely to be true than not. But then what I'm asking for is what you regard as evidence, what you regard as justifiable reasons to regard such a belief as true.
Okay, so you're asking for a definition of evidence. A
Yes,
body of objectively
basically.
verifiable facts that are positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with one available position or hypothesis over any other.
How are you defining facts here?
I just said objectively verifiable data.
No, but you said objectively verifiable facts, but you didn't really.
All right, so this is where I guess really start getting technical, which we're not going to get into what actually means to be a fact, because it is really complicated. He had this very same discussion with a guy named Dr. John Mark Reynolds, and he wasn't quite understanding what Dr. Reynolds was telling him, even though Dr. Reynolds is a creationist. He is a philosopher, and he was explaining to him very basic things about what is constitutive of a fact. And a fact is basically a truth bearer. Something that, if you want to you go to like correspondence theory of truth, there's a truth maker that makes a proposition true, and a proposition is a truth bearer. It could be true or false. And so, again, Aron is just regurgitating these things he's had memorized for a lot of years about what he thinks is evidence. And in science, I'm not going to disagree with him. Science tends to be what is more likely to make a hypothesis more likely than some other hypothesis, right? What is more parsimonious? What is more likely the case? And that's fine. That's what evidential would mean when it comes to science, but it doesn't necessarily apply to philosophy, because evidence could be anything that you support, anything you give to somebody to evaluate. Okay. But Aron is basically saying to Abdul here, hey, look, you have to show me God's a fact. You have to show me God exists. You have to demonstrate that God has a presence that I can see and observe and test. That's kind of what he's trying to imply. And this is what Abdul was going to ask him. What is your criteria to say that you're justified to believe that there's no God, or to know that there's no God? And Aron is coming from a very scientific perspective. It's strictly empiricism at this point with him.
It's a bit redundant. It's a bit redundant because people don't understand. The reason I say that is because people don't understand that the word fact is already objectively verifiable data. So it's not a fact just because you say it's a fact. It's a fact when we can show that it's a fact.
And I'm not sure that follows it's objectively verifiable. There might be facts out there we have no idea to be able to even verify. There might be facts that are off limits to us, epistemically speaking. So I don't know why a fact has to be objectively verifiable. There's subjective facts. There's objective facts. There's the fact if I'm in pain, that fact that exists that I'm in pain is the pain I'm having is subjective, right? It might be a fact that I'm having pain, but the subjective quality of it is a subjective fact. Nobody else can feel my pain, so I don't know why that would be something that has to be a criteria for a fact. Again, this is just how I'm looking at it. Feel free to weigh in on the live chat too. So I am watching the live chat.
Fact.
Is the law of non-contradiction a fact?
I don't know if that qualifies as a fact. We put this together. We analyze the universe in properties of it, and we try to work out the laws of that universe. When we summarize by a mathematical equation or a summary statement what we think the properties of the universe are, we have gotten them wrong before. So it's our best estimation.
Yeah. So the statement something X cannot be both X and not X at the same time in the same way. That's not a fact about reality.
I would say that I'm certainly going to adhere to that. But if it's something that we worked out about the universe, again, it's up to human foibles. I'm going to say that to the extent of our knowledge, no, you can't be something and both not be that something.
Okay, so I mean,
all right, so all right. This is a logical fact. Okay, the law of non-contradiction is a logical fact, and basically it is, you can't have two propositions that are diametrically contradictory each other both be true at the same time, right? So a proposition can only be true or false. You can't have a proposition and the negation of that proposition both be true or both be false. That's the law of non-contradiction. And it's a descriptive thing, right? And it's found in classical logic, but there's other logics that don't necessarily have the law of non-contradiction. And so it is a fact that the law of non-contradiction is a logical necessity within the scope of classical logic, right? So I don't know what he'd consider to be a fact then. If that's not a fact, then what would be? Now, again, there's no ontological presence for the law of non-contradiction. It's a logical fact, which is a type of metaphysical fact. All logical facts are metaphysical facts. Not all metaphysical facts are logical facts, as I understand them. So that would be a logical necessity. That's to be true in all possible worlds. That's the foundation from which most theists start doing their philosophy from and their belief system from, is they do start from a foundation of laws of logic, right? This is why we always talk about the principles of logic. This is what all three of them, I'm sure, would say. Yeah, these are principles of logic that we adhere to for conditions of rationality, right? And so for Aron to say, well, it's not a fact, or he's not sure if it's a fact, I'm not sure what that means. right? I mean, again, I'm watching the live chat. Work with me here because there's a lot to talk about in this. I really do think I bit off more than I can chew because it's a long video. They get into a lot of deep stuff, and I'm trying to explain it the best I can. But I'm trying to get principled charity too. What is Aron thinking here? I mean, what do you think he's thinking here when he says, well, I have maybe a fact. I don't know. Well, again, that's a priori knowledge too, right? Law of non-contradiction would be a priori. We don't have to go out and observe it to understand that. But he's so locked in his mindset that we have to have empiricism. We have to observe things. Everything's a posteriori, I guess. And so he's not even allowing for, hey, there might be just something we just can say exists. It's true, right? Because it is axiomatic. And so, yes, it might have some kind of ontological correspondence, but it doesn't matter. We don't have to go out and discover these things, even though they are descriptive. We can know these things a priori. And again, this is how I view things. Not everybody views things the same way. So if you have a different philosophical standpoint, that's fine too.
I guess because for you, I know you appreciate science, right? And you value science a lot, right? And the idea here is that science is based on certain logical frameworks and philosophical presuppositions. And the discussion about philosophical underpinnings, the discussion about what evidence is really a philosophical discussion. Right. It's because you don't have any experiment to answer that question. You don't have any, you can't take me to a lab and show me under a microscope what evidence is. You need to define it first in order to regard whatever you're going to show me as evidence. Okay. So you need to have a certain epistemic framework prior to your scientific investigation in order to regard anything at all as evidence.
And that's critical. This is an example of philosophy guiding science, right? And he's absolutely right on this. Science gives us observations, gives us experimental data points, it gives us, information from observations. But you've got to guide it with something. You got to say, okay, in order for me to construe this as evidence that a hypothesis is more likely, I have to understand what evidence is in this context. That's a philosophical understanding. That isn't a scientific understanding. So this is a perfect example of philosophy trying to guide science, right?
Okay.
So it's a philosophical exercise. So I guess the reason I'm asking you what a fact is because we might disagree on that too. So you're saying an objectively verifiable fact, and I'm asking if you're
verifiable data.
A fact is objectively verifiable data. So the law of non-contradiction, for example, the laws of logic, mathematics, and the philosophical underpinnings of science, these are not facts.
We can take mathematics to be fact.
Okay. So your view about these...
really quickly, would you take the law of non-contradiction as a data point? Is that how we came to the conclusion, or how you came to the conclusion about, the law of non-contradiction?
I'm not sure about the question.
So I'm saying this is that either we use certain logical axioms in order to interpret the data, which basically means it comes prior to the observation, or we're saying that the logical axioms or these logical principles come after our observation of the universe. So I'm saying the law of non-contradiction, which you agreed is generally what you accept, does it come through the data, the observation?
So my question about it.
See, again, the law of non-contradiction doesn't have to be demonstrable or verifiable. First of all, there's huge problems with verificationism because, how do you verify the principle of verificationism? It's kind of self-refuting. But you don't go out and have to observe the law of non-contradiction or the law of identity, right? You don't have to. These are a priori things. And he's still stuck in this strict empirical mindset that you have to observe things and demonstrate and have scientific, testing and experimentation, which is great for science. If he's in that scope, then, I'm probably not going to disagree with Aron. But Aron's constantly in the wrong domain of discourse. He's taking what he understands about science and he's misapplying it to what, I hope I don't butcher his name, Sharif is trying to say here, right? And there's a word for this. This is a legit word, scientism. This is the misappropriation of the scientific method and understanding of science outside the domain that it's supposed to be used for. This is what Aron, I think, is doing. It's pure scientism because he's not understanding what Sharif is saying. He's saying, look, do we start with these logical laws or do we, start somewhere else and then discover them through like experimentation and observations? I believe they're a priori. They're foundational, right? And I'm pretty sure that all three of these theists would probably accept it as well. So I don't know where Aron's starting from as far as his foundations here.
Being the fact is whether it's objectively verifiable. I would assume that, I'm happy to assume that it's true, but I don't know how we would verify that. I think we just have to assume that it's true.
So in essence, what you're saying is that you will only believe in something which is demonstrable from the point of view of empirically demonstrable. If it's not empirically demonstrable, then you can't justify it as a fact or an evidence.
I can believe that something is likely to be the case, because when I say I believe something, I think I mean something different than when a believer says that. If I say that I believe something, I mean that this is what I suspect to be true or closest to the truth. but that I don't know it is because I can't show that it is.
Right. I'm going to stop it there because there's a huge disconnect here. Notice how he's using the word belief, right? He's not really using it in the epistemological sense of a disposition that a proposition is true, right? When we say that I believe the sky is blue, I'm saying that the proposition the sky is blue is true. That's what it infers, right? You're holding that propositional content is the case. There's some state of affairs that exist that is making that fact or truth bearer the case. And so he's using it more of in a kind of a, it's not equivocation because I think that he actually just thinks this way. He's using belief as, hey, look, I have a propensity that, this might be the case, but it's not knowledge. And by the way, people have beliefs all the time. They're not knowledge, right? Knowledge requires different conditions other than belief, right? You have to believe it. It has to be true and it has to be justified under JTB. And there's other theories out there too. But he's like, I kind of, I have an opinion on it, but I'm not quite convinced. That's how he's using belief. And so if you're not convinced, then you don't believe, right? We as people that like epistemology, if you are convinced, you believe. If you're not convinced, you don't believe. I don't think Aron's using it this way. Again, I'm trying to give the most amount of principle of charity, but I think he's using belief a little bit differently than how I would. And he says how like theists use the word belief, which I think he thinks is just blind faith. They believe in God by blind faith. And even a lot of them disagree with him on that, on the word pistis, I think is the term. So that's how I kind of read into that. So,
whereas a believer will simply say that they express their belief as knowledge and say that they know that it is because they believe that it is.
And I don't know any theist that's ever done that. I don't know. Maybe he has run across theists to do that. Now, I do have theists that say, yeah, they know God exists. But they're not saying, hey, I believe it, therefore I know it. They say, I believe it, I'm also justified to believe it's knowledge and try to justify that way. Do I think they're right? No. But I mean, there's a difference between that and what he's saying, oh, well, theists go around saying, well, I believe God exists, therefore I know God exists. And I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I don't think either any of us here believes that we should believe in something just because we claim we believe in it, and that's simply enough. I think the issue is this: is that when we seek to analyze this question about a necessary being, and obviously you hold on to the hard atheist position that there is definitely no necessary being. The question then becomes, okay, we've got this
body. Why would
body.
it be necessary?
What do you mean? Why would it be necessary?
Why would it be necessary?
So do you know what a necessary being would be? What that refers to?
No, I'm asking you.
Okay, so a necessary being means that which exists and couldn't be any other way. Yeah. So when we talk about a necessary being, we're saying that there's something that exists as a foundation to reality that has to be and couldn't be any other particular way, which is contrasted to something which we call a possible or contingent being.
I see how he shakes his head on this. I mean, Sharif explained it just fine. I mean, I don't see anything issue-wise in what he said. A necessary being is an object or something that exists in all possible worlds that could not fail to exist. A contingent thing means that it exists in at least one possible world, but not all of them, because then it would be necessary. So a contingent thing is something, for example, like my magic cup here that you can't see, can you? Yeah, you can't see it, but you have to have faith that I have a cup in my hand, okay? Even though you can't see it, it's there, okay? But this doesn't have to exist in every possible world. There's no metaphysical necessity for that, right? It's contingent. It is a contingent existence that is based upon other things that made it come into being, right? There's plastics involved. There's molding involved. There's the people that designed it. There's other things that there had a causal chain that put all the plastic molecules together to make this particular magical cup. That's contingent. A metaphysical necessity would something be like the law of the laws of logic are metaphysical, logical and metaphysical necessities because of classical logic. So, A equals A has to hold true in all possible worlds. It cannot fail to be that way, right? You can never have a possible world where you have A equals not A, because now you have a logical contradiction. Okay, that would only be in an impossible world. And so I don't think Aron's really understanding what they mean by contingent and necessary, because what they're doing is like I said, an argument from contingency. They're saying, hey, look, all contingent things have to have an explanation, which they get into. And Aron just kind of looks at them like, these are just, meaningless words. No, they're possible world semantics that have very real world applications as far as, like how we determine knowledge. JTP plus uses what's called a truth tracking condition that deals with possible worlds and modalities. So these things are not just like, pull out these guys' butts here. Sharif is absolutely right in explaining to him what a necessary versus contingent is, what is possible, what is, not possible. So I don't know Aron has such a disdain for that. But
where are these terms?
Yeah, I've heard them before. They're just nonsense.
Yeah. See, they're nonsense. What makes these words nonsense? Possible world semantics is pretty big thing in philosophy, right? I mean, David Lewis would probably turn over his grave to hear him say something like that. What makes them nonsense? I mean, he's just by fiat saying, you know what? I don't understand these words, therefore they're nonsense. And people do that to me all the time too. Oh, well, Steve's argument is incoherent. Well, wait a minute. These people understood my argument. If they have coherency and they understand it, and it's intelligible to them, just because it isn't to you doesn't mean it doesn't have, intelligibility and meaning. And they, worse, they call things word salad. Fun fact, just because you don't understand what the hell is being said does not mean it's word salad. That's not how word salad is used. Word salad is when people actually are throwing just words in a blender in their brain and throwing them out there, right? And we've seen people do this, Deepak Chopra, that's word salad, right? But none of these guys are doing any kind of word salad, and none of these guys are doing anything that's nonsensical. These are long-standing arguments that have been around for a very long time, and they haven't gotten to their argument. They're basically just explaining things to Aron at this point, and he just throws out, they're nonsense. Okay.
Because
why would you say
want
they're
so
nonsense?
badly for there to be this being that you're going to deem it necessary when it's clearly not, and not involved. Not only is it not necessary, but it's not relevant.
Do you understand what being means in the term
I
necessary
don't
being?
know what you mean by it.
How are you interpreting it in your own head? How are you interpreting this idea
If I
of
were
necessary being?
to define a being, I would say something that exists and also has consciousness.
Yeah, see, okay. Now, we said at the very beginning, being doesn't necessarily have to have consciousness. Being just means I would explain it as ontological presence. So it has something that exists, right? I mean, something that has to exist in all possible worlds. Now, I'm not going to get into whether I accept if that's the case or not. I don't know if something has to exist in all possible worlds ontologically, right? That's I don't even know if the laws of physics have to exist in all possible worlds. Some people may argue that nomenologically that's the case. The ideal gas law has to be the case in all possible worlds. Or one of the way they usually describe it is if you have pressure, temperature, and volume. If you keep the volume the same and you raise your temperature, your pressure goes up. We all know this from physics. Some people would argue that has to hold true in all possible worlds. I don't know, right? But regardless, he doesn't really understand that they're trying to argue. They're not even trying to argue for God at this point. They're just getting to the point that they believe that there has to be some necessary being that exists, not an agent, not a conscious entity at this point, just something that exists that explains things, because they do get into the PSR. So I think he just keeps on in his head going back to hearing that metaphysical being in its mind thinking God, right? And I think it's probably affecting his ability to really conceptualize their argument here, because I mean they do get him to basically to a point where he has to capitulate that or concede that it has to be a necessary being based upon his own arguments, and then fun fact at the end, he kind of contradicts himself. So spoilers.
Right. So in philosophy, when we talk about being, we're talking about that which exists. So when we say necessary being or contingent being, we're talking about something that has to exist. Yeah, it doesn't give a particular ontology about consciousness or not. That's a separate discussion.
Correct.
But when we talk about contingent being, we're talking about something that possibly exists, or it could exist in another way. Is that clear? Because it's quite important, because if you say, well, necessary being doesn't exist, then you need to be able to understand what necessary means and also what being means in that context with regards to that. And also it goes back to the other discussion, which then becomes about evidence and proofs used to justify the existence for this necessary existence or necessary thing that must exist and cannot exist in any other way.
Yeah, maybe quantum fluctuations are a necessary, being. Maybe in all possible worlds it must be quantum fluctuations, right? Just throwing that out there. I mean that's what Sharif is kind of suggesting here, that there has to be something that's necessary that exists in all possible worlds. They haven't even got to it being some kind of agent, but Aron's kind of jumped the gun there. So
does that make sense? So the point that I was mentioning earlier is, if what we're saying, or what you're saying specifically, is that the only evidence that you see to justify your position is that which is demonstrable from an empirical point of view, then in essence you're saying anything that's outside of empiricism cannot be established or concluded, even to the least amount of doubt. We're not talking about being absolutist in our knowledge or being absolutely certain, but just simply saying that we have a set of data, we come to certain conclusions. Is that right then? So that's basically evidence for you, fact, data that allows you to conclude is only that which is demonstrably on an empirical basis.
Well, I would put it another way. I mean, if you can't know something, then you can't know it.
There's a little bit of a tautology there. Again, he doesn't address what Sharif is presenting to him, right? If you don't know something, you don't know something. What is that? The antithesis of the KK principle, that if you know something, you know something. I don't know what kind of retort that actually is. So again, if you're in the live chat, help me out here. Again, I'm trying to be as charitable as possible, but I don't know what the hell he meant by that.
Yeah,
So the only way we can know something is through empiricism. That's what you're saying.
as I said before, if you can't verify the accuracy of your claims to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, then there's no way to show what you know. There's no way to test your knowledge.
All right, so he's limiting himself to empiricism and testing. You know, again, he's stuck in that scientific mindset. He's discarded anything dealing with rationalism. He's discarded any other type of acquiring of knowledge other than the scientific method and empiricism and demonstrability, right? And so he's just locked himself into that position, and I don't know why. It just limits himself so much, and this is why I think he gets brutalized in these types of discussions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just ask a question, because we were talking about the law of non-contradiction earlier, and you seem to say that you affirmed it in the sense that that's how you use it to operate and to live by. But on the other hand, it seemed like you also said that we couldn't demonstrate that the law of non-contradiction is actually a true principle. So I'm wondering what, sort of the connection between those two things are, because if it can't be demonstrated, why are you at the same time taking it or believing in it? I guess you would say that you believe in it, but you don't know that it's true.
I'm happy to assume that it's true. I can say that I know it's true to the degree that we can't show that it's false. I mean, there's no way. How do you falsify that? You would have to show something that is both itself and not itself.
Yeah.
So we're not going to have that.
Yes, but I mean, if
philosophical conversations are just.
You guys already see that there's a chink in his mindset here, because he's at one hand saying everything has to be evidential, everything has to be empirical, everything has to be demonstrable and stuff like that. Yet I am okay with accepting this, the law of non-contradiction, which is, by the way, axiomatic. They are assumptions, but it violates his epistemic framework there, because he's saying the only way we can know something is through empiricism. Well, you don't do experimentation of the law of non-contradiction. It's a priori. So how could he even justify, saying that he knows that the law of non-contradiction is true? He couldn't in his framework, right?
Completely lost on me.
And by the way, I'm not saying that I know it either, because I do think they're unjustifiable. I think they're axiomatic, but they're properly basic. So
I'm waiting for the meat.
okay, but
philosophical conversation, they just never show up.
The meat.
So, but the issue though is,
so Aron Ra wants the meat. Just get that out there. Aron Ra wants the meat, not judging.
if you have falsifiability as a principle in order to, as you said, demonstrate something, or in order to have knowledge of it, then even by your own admission of what you just said, we could never really have knowledge of the law of non-contradiction and knowing that it's true, because it can't be falsified.
I said we can't verify it as a fact. We can assume it as a fact, but how would you test that? And I'm happy to assume that it is a fact.
So
then
then
you're looking for the relevance.
So then you think that we can assume that certain things are fact without having knowledge of them, and that's okay?
Don't we have knowledge of that?
Well, I thought you just said that we don't.
I said that when you define something as a fact because it's objectively verifiable, how do you objectively verify that something can be and both can't be what it is?
Right. So if the standard for
We don't use the
knowledge,
word fact.
He's contradicting himself, right? I mean, because he's like, okay, well, you have to, in order to establish a fact, you have to observe it as something that falsifies something that would be violation of the law of non-contradiction. And Jake's rightly pointing out, well, how would you do this? How do you observe something like that? It's taking axiomatically, and people say, yeah, I know it's true because of whatever reasons they wanted to justify it. Okay, whatever. But Aron's is basically saying you have to have an objective thing that you have to observe that makes something a fact. But in this particular case, I don't have that, but I'm happy to accept the law of non-contradiction is true. Well, no, you can't have it both ways. I mean, he straight up just violated his own premises of what his foundations were, what it would mean to have knowledge of something, or to think something is true, or have a fact. Again, in the live chat, let me know if I'm completely misreading him, but that's how I interpreted it.
Well, we can still use the word knowledge because we have examples of things being what they are. We have no possibility of it not being what it is. So then we don't have that. Then we can establish. Okay, yeah, then that has to be true.
right? Well, that would be considered a necessary being or a necessary fact.
It wouldn't.
Yes, it would, because you just said it couldn't possibly be another way, which means that it's necessary.
I said
Right.
there's no possibility of it.
Well, okay. Oh God, I picked a bad time to not drink today. I'm just drinking coffee. All right, Aron, dude, if you say something is a logical impossibility, right? If you say something like, "Oh, it cannot be any other way," that Jake's trying to say that you are saying that something is necessary, right? And Aron's basically saying no, there isn't a necessary being. Well, let me play that just real quick. I want to make sure I heard him exactly right on this again.
Yes, it would, because you just said it couldn't possibly be another way.
Right, couldn't possibly be any other way.
I said
So
there's
it's
no
necessary.
possibility of it.
Right. So it couldn't be any other possible way. That means it must be necessary.
Right, which means that it's necessary.
Which means that there's literally no possibility. It doesn't mean that it's necessary.
Yeah, I think you're saying the same thing.
In order to say whether something is possible, in order to say whether something is, well, you can't, in science, you can't say that something is. Like religion always, asserts facts that aren't facts and pretends to know things nobody can know, right? That's just every religion does that. But science can't do that because that is effectively lying. When you say something is a fact, it's not a fact. When you say you know things no one can even know, those are both lies. But in order to say whether something is true, you have to have the evidence indicating that. You have to be able to immediately show that there is evidence indicating that. In order to say whether something is possible, you have to show a precedent or a parallel or verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. When you don't.
All right, that's incorrect. Let me read the super chat real quick. Kwasa 10,001. Thank you, Kwasa. Appreciate you guys' super chats. And I will stop the video anytime you guys use your super chat. So feel free. Damn, those are some sharp Muslims. I better get rid of the stereotype in my head. Yeah, these guys know what they're doing. And here's the thing. I think Aron is so frightful to have to agree with a theist, or especially a Muslim, because, he's very much against Islam. I'm not a fan of Islam either, but I'm not anywhere. I'm not well versed in Islam. I'm just not. I just don't have an interest in it. So I'm not even going to address anything that these guys would ever have when it comes to the arguments for Islam. I couldn't do it. I don't have the ability to. I don't have the interest to, and I'm not even going to bother. Okay. But that doesn't mean that they're not wrong about anything else, right? I mean, what they're talking about is this philosophy, right? Doesn't matter if from a theist, doesn't matter if from an atheist, doesn't matter from agnostic. This is just foundational stuff, right? And so, yeah, and I think that Aron and the ACA, Atheist Community of Austin and American Atheists have dumbed people down so much because they're telling atheists, look, you don't have a burden of proof. You just need to tell a theist you don't believe them. And then you get theists like this that know philosophy that just run circles around these atheists, right? Just run circles around them. And it hasn't done the atheist community any bit of good, because I've been ringing this bell for a long time. Look, if you're going to go up against theists that actually know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to philosophy, and you don't have even a modicum of understanding of the terminology or the concepts, you're going to have a bad day. You're going to have a bad time at it. So, I really wish people would have listened to me earlier on that. And I wasn't the only one saying that, but this is a perfect example. All you atheists out there that are huge fans of Aron, this is a perfect example why it helps to at least understand the concepts before you go talk on these kinds of discussions with these types of theists, because, they're going to run circles around you.
Don't have that. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not possible. It just means there is no possibility.
Oh yeah. Let me get back to that. The way I understand possible world semantics, and I know we have a few philosophers in the live chat, so check me. The way I understand possible world theory, something's considered possible until it's demonstrated to be impossible. It's the antithesis of science, right? So in science is, here's my position, it's my hypothesis, let's demonstrate it. But in possible world semantic, as I understand it, everything's considered possible until it's demonstrated logically through a proof by contradiction or proof by impossibility that it cannot be the case. Okay, so because that's how I particularly understand it. So if I'm wrong on that, please correct me. But I don't think he's right on that.
So Aron, you're saying that religion makes claims that you couldn't possibly verify and you don't have evidence for. First of all, I want to say, you said you want to get to the meat of it, right? And this is the problem, that we are coming from different angles, and we have different epistemic commitments. And what we want to do is come to a certain common ground in order for the conversation to move forward. We need to agree what it means for evidence to be, and what it means for verification to be, and fact to be, and all of these things. Because a lot of times these discussions just go on for hours of people talking past each other, using these terms differently, or not even understanding what they are whatsoever. Right. I mean, there's a lot of philosophical literature out there about this, and it's not like any of this is non-controversial. But you said that religion asserts things without evidence. So you asserted a while ago that it is not a possibility that a necessary being exists. I'm wondering what your evidence is for that.
That is a huge claim, by the way. Okay, so there's different I think there's different degrees of claims. So I don't believe in the whole extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence kind of thing, because I think it adds a subjective quality to something that doesn't need to be there. But I do think there's different degrees of what you need to justify this, right? So the belief justification is lower than a knowledge justification. Knowledge justification is lower than a certainty justification. He's having one of the most highest justifications. He's saying something is impossible. That requires a logical proof. that actually is something that I would say, I would personally argue, and people might argue against me, and that's fine too. Maybe I'm wrong on it. I don't know. What the hell do I know? But to me, when somebody says it's logically impossible, you need a logical proof by impossibility. You need a reductio. Okay? You need to show by a logical proof that it is the case that this cannot exist. Like a square circle. You're going to show that a square circle can't exist. You can show certain things to be the case that are impossible, right? But just by saying by fiat gods are impossible, that's a hell of a claim. And Abdul, is that his name? Abdul, I'm sorry, is right. What is your reasoning for this, Aron?
No possibility that a necessary being exists. That's a positive statement. I was wondering what your evidence is for that. So what's the objectively verifiable fact that points you to this proposition that a necessary being cannot exist?
Once again, I repeat, in order to say whether something is possible, you have to show that there is a precedent or parallel or verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. No one has ever presented one. You're welcome to prove me wrong by presenting that.
What makes a God impossible? Now, I mean, sure, if he wants to talk about a very specific God dealing with the omni properties and the logical problem of evil, then I would agree with him. That particular God does not exist. I would be fine to say I'm a local atheist of that type of God. That's a very narrow type of God, and I don't think most theists posit that particular God. I think they do have some restrictions on the omnibenevolence and the omnipotence and the omniscience, but he's just throwing it out there. He's just saying, look, you have to show me that at least possible. No, nobody has to show him it's possible. You have to show that it's impossible. That's your claim. You have the positive claim there. And by the way, it's not just the positive claim that has a burden of proof, okay? Yes, anybody who has a positive claim has one, but it's not the only time, right? So people need to get out of that mindset that only the person making a positive claim has a burden of proof. No, there's a ton of different burden of proofs out there, which is a whole different video that we'll have to do one of these days. But he's burden shifting. He's like, hey, gods are impossible. Prove to me that's not the case. This is a definitive, in my mind, textbook burden shift. Again, live chat, let me know what you guys think of that.
That possibility. But if you don't present that possibility, then you're going to have to concede there is no possibility to present.
But right, the problem right now, Aron, is that you're making a positive ontological claim about reality by saying that in order to say that something is possible, we have to show that it is possible through objectively verifiable facts.
I said there's no possibility.
Yeah, but the problem is you yourself right now are making a claim about reality, and you're not holding yourself by the same standard.
I am definitely holding myself by the same standard. I'm saying that believers have not presented any such possibility. You are welcome to do so. But until someone does, my statement remains true.
How is that not burden shifting? And by the way, if you really wanted to probably break it down, you could argue that he's probably doing an argument from ignorance as well. You might be able to make an argument. He's saying, look, I believe that gods are impossible, which implies, that the proposition of theism is false, that, there are no gods, based upon they haven't been proven true yet, right? Which is definitively the argument from ignorance.
No one has ever produced a possibility that God exists.
So if no one ever, let's for the sake of argument for a second, because I disagree, obviously, but
okay.
If no one ever produced a possibility, if no one ever producing a possibility that God exists entails that it is not possible that God exists, if that's your view,
that would not have been. In fact, I corrected earlier. I said exactly the opposite. I said that just because you don't have a possibility doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means there's literally no possibility to discuss.
Oh, okay. So you're not a hard atheist in the sense that you say a necessary being does not exist. You're just saying
I'm a hard atheist.
You're more of an agnostic.
No, I'm a hard atheist in the sense that I know that God does not exist in the same way, for the same reasons, and to the same degree that I know that leprechauns don't exist.
All right, so he's really clear on this. He believes there are no gods. As a matter of fact, he makes it a knowledge claim, and I think he goes beyond that. I think he says, not only do I believe there are no gods, not only do I claim knowledge there's no gods, I'm claiming they're impossible. Now, I got to tell you, I've seen no evidence from him yet that they're impossible. And to burden shift that and say, no, you need to show me that they're at least possible, how is that not burden shifting? That's his claim. They're impossible. Okay. At that point, nobody has to do anything. You're just like, oh, you claim they're impossible. What is your evidence for that, right? And if you want to play the evidence game. And by the way, logical proof is evidence. I don't think Aron even understands that logical proof is evidence, right? Because he wants things tangible. He wants it, oh, here's God, observe it and do scientific experiments on it and have some tangibility. Sure, that's a form of evidence, but not all evidence is like that, right? A logical proof would be evidence. He needs to show by evidence, a logical proof, that gods are not possible. That'd be a hell of a... If he could do that, right, then what the hell have people been arguing about for thousands of years, right? I mean, if he has that skill level to show that all gods are impossible, game over, man. Theists are done. What the hell are y'all sitting around even having discussions for?
But yeah, what's your basis for that? So, for example, when we talk about leprechauns, so philosophers talk about there's a famous saying, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and that of course needs to be qualified. So philosophers normally say that they speak about this, and they say that evidence of absence is absence of evidence is evidence of absence in a situation where the being that you're positing would actually leave what you would actually expect for it to leave evidence that you did not find when you're investigating it. So if you posit that a leprechaun exists, or if you say that like Bigfoot exists or whatever, we should expect a certain type of evidence that we can verify, through which we can verify the existence of such a being. But
I like the way he added the caveat on that, because again, people will argue that in Bayesian that absence of evidence is evidence of absence, and in Bayesian that does kind of hold true from what I understand. However, generally speaking, when we say that, look, I'm justified to believe something because I have an absence of evidence, it is if there's an expectation of evidence to be had. And what is our expectations? Well, for leprechauns, one could argue, hey, look, from what I understand about leprechauns, if I look at a rainbow and I go to that end of the rainbow, I should find a pot of gold. Oh, don't find a pot of gold. That's my expectation. The likelihood that leprechauns exist has gone down, opposed to, some other hypothesis that, the rainbow is, caused by light going through, water droplets, right? So, yeah, I think that Abdul is perfectly sound to say this. I mean, that, hey, look, if you think God doesn't exist, what is your expectation of what you would look for as far as to say you're not finding God kind of thing? Nothing wrong with that. I don't have an issue with that. I think I really like the fact that he added that little caveat on that you have the expectation of evidence. And that's why I can say, look, there's no such thing as leprechauns. I'll throw that claim out there, right? There are no leprechauns. Why? Well, again, we would expect this and we don't find this. And then we get into a whole, not being parsimonious and whatever. But, you can justify it. Aron doesn't justify anything. He's really bad at justifying his positions. And it goes back to what I said originally. You can believe 0.99 repeating equals 1, but if you believe it for the wrong reasons, you're not justified. And this is what I think Aron's major issue is. He's not justified to hold the positions he holds.
Right now, you're saying. Right now, I don't believe that leprechauns exist because I expect a certain set of data or evidence. If it were to exist, I would expect that kind of evidence that would verify its existence. Now, in the case of the existence of God, what is that evidence that you haven't found that makes you come to the same conclusion that we do about leprechauns?
Okay, those are different topics. First of all, you would expect to find evidence of Bigfoot, and we would have found it by now if there was such a thing. And leprechauns, on the other hand, are entirely supernatural. Like God, they are entirely supernatural. They leave no trace of themselves, even when they supposedly do something. So people will attribute everything that happens to God, even when there's a natural explanation for it. They don't care. They know that there's a natural explanation, and they'll just pretend that God orchestrated that natural explanation. So natural explanations still become explanations of God, and then they'll pretend things.
Yeah, but that's sorry, Aron. That's precisely the point. So Bigfoot, there would be evidence. We don't have the evidence. Bigfoot doesn't exist. Leprechauns wouldn't leave evidence behind. Therefore, what a lot of people say is that in this case, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence because there is no predicted set of there's not a predicted set of data that you would expect as evidence were a leprechaun to exist. So right now, I'm saying, what is this evidence that you would expect to exist if God existed?
Fair question.
And basically that we don't have access to, so that justifies you in concluding that God does not exist.
Again, referring to leprechauns, you're looking for a way to disprove leprechauns, and the point that you're missing is that there's no reason to believe leprechauns.
Oh, that's not a justification. Okay, this is a Tom Jump thing. And Aron Ra listens to the worst people, I think, to get his philosophy from, right? I mean, the people that are absolutely horrible about these types of subjects, this is where I think Aron gets his information from, rather than listening to people that maybe know a little bit more than them. And by the way, I'm not even talking about me because I am lay as hell. But there are people that I know that are very well versed in these topics that have had discussions with Aron, and he doesn't want it to understand them. And so he just throws these things out there. And it's just like, no, what Abdul is saying, it makes a lot of sense. What is it that you're expecting? If God exists, what are your conditions by which you would expect him to exist? Now, I think there's actual outs for that. I think God had all these things that he did 2,000 years ago. I mean, he talked to people, he walked with people, he had communication with them, he did miracles. Well, why not today? And people can, have a retort, well, dispensational and this and this, he doesn't do it anymore. Well, okay, fine. But you know what he did back then? I would expect that maybe he does now. I'm not saying this, therefore the likelihood that God exists is pretty low, right? Perfectly fine. That's reasonable to me. I get it. Aron doesn't even do anything like that. So, and by the way, when I listened to this, the first thing that came to my mind, and we're not going to get into it, but it was the Raven paradox, because you guys know that's one of my favorite all-time epistemological paradoxes, because it's counterintuitive, right? And so I don't think Aron would have I don't think he would conceptualize the Raven paradox, or, and how to kind of even assail that. And by the way, I just bite the bullet on it. But yeah, so I thought about the Raven paradox, and you guys can go look it up. I'm not going to get into it. We've talked about it before, but you guys that know what it is will definitely understand. Aaron would be like, whoa, what? How is a green apple evidence that all black ravens are black, right? Yeah.
Two separate issues, though. There's two separate issues. One
You need to have a reason to believe something.
Yeah, that's right. You need to have a reason to believe something. That's one thing. The second thing is having an understanding that something is impossible. Those are two separate issues.
Okay.
Now, what Abdul is explaining, he's saying that, look, if you just have an absence of evidence of X, it doesn't mean that X doesn't exist. So if I turn around and I say X does not exist, it means that I'm making a positive claim. Now, what Abdul said, he said that to make that positive claim that X does not exist, one of the ways would be to say, well, if X existed, I would see this evidence. If this evidence doesn't exist, therefore that justifies me saying that X does not exist. So he's asking the same question because you're in a position where you made a hard atheist claim that God does not exist.
What was my hard atheist claim?
Yeah, no, I mean, Sheriff is spot on with that, and I'm glad that he kind of differentiates on these things. It's not sufficient to say, look, there's no reasons to believe in leprechauns, there's no reason to believe in God. No, he made a positive claim. There are no gods. It's impossible is his claim, right? And then Aaron's like, well, what did I claim? You claimed they're impossible. I mean, come on, man.
So the hard atheism, that God does not exist. That is your position. Not that I don't believe in God because of lack of evidence. A soft atheist claim, but it's a hard atheist claim. So what Abdul is asking is a very specific question. He's saying, look, if you're making this claim that God does not exist, X does not exist, you have to either demonstrate that if God existed or X existed, we would see this evidence. Because we don't see this evidence, then I can discount God. Yeah. So you have to explain what Abdul's specific question was. You have to explain what that evidence is that we would expect, such that it doesn't exist, leading us to the conclusion that God doesn't exist.
Right.
Oh, I feel like repeating myself an awful lot. You're asking questions I've already answered.
No, honestly, and again, I'm not trying to be exceptionally hard on Aaron, but he's not answering these questions. The questions were very straightforward. If God exists, what would you expect the evidence to be? Again, asking my live chat, has Aaron given a single condition of what he would expect if God exists? Because if he did, I did not hear it. This is like the third time I've watched this. Okay, I watched it full, and I kind of piecemealed it. Now I'm watching it full again. I don't remember anything he said what he expected, at least not up to this point. No.
But we don't have a possibility. We start with that. And it's not just
that's a positive claim.
Things are defined in reverse. I mean, you want to imagine that somehow the mind exists outside of the brain. There's no support for mind-body dualism whatsoever. But you're assuming that consciousness pre-exists matter, and there's no logical conclusion that would lead you to any of the gods that men have ever devised. When you look at the entirety of the cosmos, there's just no way to conclude that this thing cares that much about the skin on the tip of our penis if it created 11 jillion galaxies and so forth.
I mean, it's kind of rhetoric at that point. And again, I think that he kind of doesn't differentiate between a logical impossibility and a metaphysical impossibility. Right. So, like I can say, look, pigs at any minute now, pigs can fly out of my ass. OK, that's not a logical impossibility. It's perfectly logical. Now, people can say, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not logical. No, you're confusing logic with kind of, reasonable as far as what we understand about biology and physics. Right. Nomologically, yeah, that's not going to happen. The laws of physics prevent that. Right. Biologically, it's impossible for pigs to fly out of my ass. We all understand that. But these guys are not talking about that. They're talking about logical possibilities. And Aaron has said it is impossible, and he's talking about logically impossible. Right? I mean, I think I don't know if he's explicit in that, but I'm pretty sure that he's talking about God being logically impossible. That's a hell of a different claim, right? So people have to understand there's different types of possibility. And so just because something sounds egregious, it doesn't mean it's a logical impossibility. It's in some possible world, it is true that pigs have flying out my ass because it's possible. It's not a logical impossibility. It must be existence in at least one possible world. That's how they would look at that.
There's not a possibility for him to. How does he control whether your team wins the game or whether you find your keys? How does he manipulate matter? And believers will commonly tell me that that God helped them in.
These are not logical possibilities.
In that case, God had to manipulate other people's minds, control other people's free will in order to, manipulate everything to these ends. And they're just not thinking this through. So what I need is we need to show that there's a there, or we literally have nothing to talk about.
Yeah. So this, again, like I said, there's two issues. One issue is to make a positive claim that God does not exist. That's one issue, which means that we're saying it's logically impossible for God to exist. The second claim is, do we have justification and reasons? Yeah. So do we have justifications, reasons to believe something? Yeah. So there's two separate issues. And what we're saying is that you're talking about is this first point, which is you're basically saying that it's logically impossible for X to exist. Some of the arguments that you used was just simply to say that, well, if God exists, there needs to be consciousness, and for consciousness to exist, there needs to be a body to exist. Is that, am I understanding your particular?
By definition of what a mind is, yeah. I mean, a mind is the product of biology.
Okay, we're gonna get, before we even get into this. I could just give a little spoilers. Aron just right off the bat just assumes a theory of mind that minds have to have biological substrate. Just right off the bat. I mean, by fiat, by definition, because this is something I've harped on for so long, and this is again detrimental to atheists out there that do this, and I see them do it all the time in Facebook groups. And I'm going to say it one more time and make it very clear for them that anybody that's watching this, a dictionary does not prescribe usages. It describes them. In other words, it says this is how the word's being used, and it gives a general definition. Okay, that's a completely different thing. And by the way, these three guys really do understand definitions because they get into subject and predicate and analytic and synthetic distinctions, and they do know what they're talking about. So when Aron goes to Google something, he sees, oh, look, this is the definition. He thinks that's prescriptive. It's not. For example, if I go Google the word house and it says, like, you know, I did this the other day and I forgot what it says, something about you know, some kind of dwelling for a family, right? You know, some kind of housing and dwelling for a family. Well, okay, or a group of people, and I'm like, wait a minute, I was in barracks. That's a housing for a group of people. That's not a house. Apartment's not a house. A condominium's not a house, right? It's a general description, right? And so there might be a necessary condition, but usually definitions are not sufficient and they're not prescribed. So when you have a definition, it's just giving you a general idea of how this word is being used. And I think Aron doesn't understand that distinction because they get into the difference between an analytical proposition versus a synthetic. And they're right about it. And he doesn't understand it. He just reads something on Google. It says, this is the definition. No, Aron. Until you understand that when you see that definition, that is just describing something and not prescribing it, you're going to have a bad time when you go against theists like this.
So if there's no biology, how can you have a mind?
Okay. Is that a conclusion that you come through an inductive process, or is that a conclusion that is
deductive? That's by definition. That's what I understand a mind to be. So you have to redefine what a mind is if you want to have a
by definition
consciousness. It requires a redefinition of mind, to my understanding.
Yeah. So nobody. When we talk about the issue of the mind, nobody sends around and says mind by definition needs a brain or is a brain. Yeah. That is where you put the predicate within the subject. Nobody puts the predicate within the subject to say that it has to be this way.
Nobody meaning me, and a lot of other people who actually do that. Yeah,
no, because it's like, for example, look, as an example, yeah, if I turn around and I say an unmarried bachelor, yeah, well, that's where you put the predicate within the subject, yeah. So you're basically saying the same thing, yeah. When you say mind, you're saying nobody does
what I do, and
all right, let me clarify that for people. So what Surf is saying is that when you have the predicate in the subject, you can infer what the word means by the predication of self. Okay, so when you say unmarried bachelor, the term unmarried means that they're a bachelor, right? So a bachelor, well, I should say a bachelor is an unmarried man, right? So you can infer by the word bachelor that they're unmarried, right? Triangle is defined in mathematics as having three sides, right? So if I see something that's a triangle, by definition, because it's a mathematical definition, triangles are defined by three sides. It's an analytical proposition, right? It's not something synthetic. It doesn't have to be that way, but a triangle by definition has three sides. So all things that as a geometric two-dimensional shape that has three sides and three apexes and stuff like that is defined as a triangle. So that's the difference between an analytic and synthetic distinction. My cup is green is not analytical. You can't. How would I know my cup is green just by saying cup? Right? There's nothing in that tells me that this cup is green because you can't see it. And so that's a synthetic type of thing, right? So the analytic distinction means that you have the predicate with the subject that you can determine what the word is just by the word itself. Does that kind of make sense?
No, I'm saying you're saying by definition. You're saying by definition. I'm saying it's not by definition that you can say that the mind is reduced to the brain. That wouldn't be that.
Right, and he's right. There's many theories of mind. I mean, so you can't say by definition that a mind is somehow reduced to a biological substrate. That would just negate by fiat some things like dualism and some other things that the mind must exist non-independent of brain, right? Well, okay, well there's theories out there that maybe that it can exist outside the body or the mind or the brain itself. I don't particularly subscribe to that, but Aren't just saying by fiat, no, you gotta have a brain because of Google definition.
the correct way
You,
to say
you
that.
have to
You could
redefine,
say
I said you have to redefine mind. So now you're going to redefine mind for me.
No, he's not redefining
it comes
anything.
down to the issue of how we understand this term by definition. When we say by definition, what we're saying is that literally in the definition of the word, we can come to this
Yes.
conclusion. And I'm saying that you don't have to, it's not even the definition of the word brain that you come to the conclusion of a mind. Yeah, that would be
But
false.
in the reverse,
That would
it
be
should be.
a fallacious link between the two.
Right,
Because
he's
we have
absolutely
to
right.
have a further justification that a brain causes or produces the mind. So it's not by definition in that sense. That's why we have experiments. That's why we have neuroscientists, because they have to investigate this, as opposed to just simply saying we can just define it by the mind. For example, by definition, a triangle has 3 sides. I don't need to investigate. I don't need to empirically study this. I can come to that conclusion just by the definition of the word. Yeah. So I'm just saying it's false to argue that by definition, brain equals mind or mind equals brain.
Right.
Because
Well, I didn't say that. I did not say that mind equals brain. I said that mind is a product of biology. So in the definition.
Okay, no, there's no definitional thing for that, right? There's nothing definitional about mind requiring biology. Now, we could argue, hey, look, from our observation, this is, what we run across. And, because of that, I think the likelihood of a disembodied mind existing independent of a physical substrate is low. Okay, fine. That's an argument to be had. But Aron's not even doing that. He's just discounting it by fiat by saying, I looked up this definition. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't even mention the word biological. He's kind of smuggling that in. But so what? He's just basically saying, oh, it has to have a biology. Why? There's no argument for that.
Definition, just look up common definition. The element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences, to think and to feel the faculties of consciousness and thought. So yes, in the definition.
There's nothing in the definition about biology there.
Right there in the definition, it is a product of biology.
Where? Which part?
I said that that's by definition, and it is by definition. You verify it, and that you were going to have to redefine mind to take it otherwise. And now you are going to redefine mind for me because I was right.
Aaron, which part of that definition do you think that it necessitates it being a product of biology?
The element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and of their experiences. So yes, it's pulling.
How would that not apply? Okay, and again, I'm not Islam and I'm not a theist, but let's work with this. How does that preclude a God? Why would that not apply to a God? If a God existed, he would have a mind, he would have intentionality, he would have some kind of process. Where does that definition preclude a mind or exclude it? And by the way, even if it said biology, it doesn't matter because you don't use general understanding of terminology in a domain of discourse of this type, right? Just because the mind is used. Oh well, the product of biological brain. Okay, well, sure. If you want to have a strictly naturalistic worldview and you want to go by science and you want to put that by fiat, which is Aron doing, I don't agree with that, but you can't just say that has to be the case. I mean, Aron can at least make some arguments. Look, I subscribe to naturalism this, and we've only seen minds with a brain. We've never seen one independently, blah, blah. But he's not running any of the arguments. He's literally doing argument by dictionary, argumentium ad dictionarium. I mean, this is the most laziest thinking I've ever seen. When people use a dictionary, a Google dictionary to argue, oh, look, you're wrong, here's the definition. No, atheists, stop doing that. You look like idiots. Straight up, you look stupid when you're trying to argue about something when it comes to philosophy or science and you break out a dictionary like a second grader. It is philosophically naive. It is to me the most basal form of argumentation, and it's just not even correct because, again, dictionaries are descriptive.
On the senses and says that it is a person to think and to feel and what part of the body thinks
so
and what part of the body feels.
So you're assuming that a person is a biological structure.
What else is it?
It's not biological.
Yeah, a person doesn't have to be biological. There is something like, a corporate personage, right? A corporate personhood, right? So yeah, we generally use personhood or personage for a person, but that's not by any kind of necessity. Corporations are treated as a personhood. So
I think every person that's ever existed has been biological.
See, the part of the issue here
there's an assumption there.
I think you're using sort of common sense, maybe understandings or definitions, but in terms of philosophy, they don't have the definitions that you're implying. If you look up
Jake is right.
in philosophy, it doesn't necessitate a biological structure.
Correct.
Okay.
If God exists, God is a personhood, right? He's a personage, right? So personhood doesn't necessarily require a biological structure. I mean, it seems to me, and again, let me ask you guys this. Aron is doing exactly what he claims theists often do. He often claims theists are trying to argue God into existence, and he's doing the opposite of that. He's trying to argue God out of existence by definition, right? He's saying, he says theists all the time argue things, by definition and argue God into existence by definition. Well, he's doing the exact same thing in the opposite, and it's just as bad.
But that's when we're talking about personhood. We were talking about the definition of mind.
Well, but you said person necessitates a biological structure.
Which it doesn't.
Okay, are we going to argue the definition of definition next? Because
Oh,
with
God.
some philosophers, I've actually had that come up. I was arguing with a professor of philosophy at a seminary school where we actually did have to bring up the definition of definition.
Yeah, and by the way, I've watched that video carefully. That was with Dr. John Mark Reynolds, who I hope to have on one of these days. He is on my Twitter, and I think I've reached out to him before. I think I've talked to him before, but I don't remember. But he's exactly right. He wasn't understanding what this seminary professor was telling him, right? He was so in his mindset, this guy, the younger creationist, he has to be wrong. And yet I didn't see anything really wrong that he was saying. He was talking about the definition of human, right? And he was just Aron was trying to say, look, humans by definition are animals. And Dr. Reynolds was saying, well, that's only if we agree upon the category of what the properties are for a human to categorize them as humans, right? Because we have a differentiation between humans and brute animals, right? We say, human, I'm not an animal, because we have an understanding in general discourse that humans are not animals to differentiate them from a brute animal, right? But biologically speaking, yes, of course, humans are animals. But it depends on the discourse. And so it depends on what we are understanding what the categories would be for a human. Aron thinks it's a metaphysical necessity that humans are animals. Why? It's a categorical fact. It's categorical, meaning that we have the categories that we set up and said, if you meet these properties for this category, then you're a human. But you don't have to accept those categories. You can say, look, I accept all this, but I don't accept animals as humans because, or humans are animals because I have animals as being brute animals, which is perfectly fine, right? Perfectly fine. I mean, we do this all the time in law. I mean, humans and animals have a differentiation, right? Because legally speaking, they're not the same thing. So we do this quite frequently. But Aron wasn't understanding what Dr. Reynolds was explaining to him about definitions. If Aron ever changes his position on anything, this is the one thing that I hope he actually learns. Stop using definitions to argue. Just stop. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that he thinks that it's a proper way to argue. This is how a creationist or flat earther would argue. There's no difference. He is the flat earther and creationist of philosophy. And it's sad for me to say that because I do have a lot of respect for Aron. He's great in that biology, and I wish to God we would have done more stuff together when it came to biological stuff and anti-creation type stuff. But I'm just not gonna suck up to him because, he's Aron Ra because he has a lot of followers. No, I'm not like that. And maybe it has affected me overall. Of course it has. I mean, I'm not anywhere near a lot of people that have become really good friends with Aron because, they just bow down to him because they believe what bullshit that he puts out is true. I'm not going to do that. It's just not my thing. And if I have to stay small, that forever, whatever. It bothers me because he's such a smart guy and he is a nice guy, but for God's sake, he just has these really stupid flat earth level arguments.
Because when the same conversation that we're having now, when it comes to evidence, he told me that evidence is not evident because facts are not factual, because nothing can ever be objectively verified.
That's not really what he was saying.
Everything is imaginary and everybody's reality is whatever they want it to be.
That's not what Dr. Reynolds was saying. I think they completely misrepresented what he was saying. And again, I'll get Dr. Reynolds on one of these days, probably with the Democracy of the Dead friend of mine that has spoken to him before, but that'd be fun. And like I said, he's a younger creationist. We disagree absolutely on that point, but again, philosophy is philosophy.
Which is why I find philosophy so utterly empty.
I don't think we're trying to do that.
Aron, with respect, I think the problem here is that you're not very concerned with the philosophy, and when you said you want to get into the meat of it, you basically want us to talk about like empirical evidence for God or something. But it seems like
why you believe what you believe. That's
yes, but in order to do that,
believe it because you're never going to come up with that. I need a reason, you don't have one.
Yeah,
so
but
I want to know why you believe.
I get that, Aron. But then in order for me to understand why you don't believe, I need to break your epistemology down and understand what, in your view, qualifies something to be a justified belief and what doesn't. And in the same way, you're going to need to understand my point of view. But it seems that here you're really unconcerned. You're undermining the value of philosophy, and it seems like that's why.
I believe there is a value of philosophy. It's just wholly misused in religion.
But when you say that mind is by definition a product of brain, then you're just you're skipping over a whole bunch of philosophy. That's like in the philosophy of mind, these discussions.
Yeah, if Aron was right, then why are there so many different theories of philosophy of mind? Which, by the way, is one of the most complicated parts of philosophy out there. I have a very difficult time with philosophy of mind, dealing with non-reduction physicalism, source dualism, property dualism, emergencism. There's a whole bunch of ways of looking at theories of mind. It's very complicated. Personally, I don't understand it very well. at all. I mean, I really don't. I would probably consider myself to be inept when it comes to theory of mind because it's that difficult. But I know enough to say you can't just say that this is the case, that a mind must have a brain by definition of Google. Because every philosopher out there that deals with theory of mind is going to cringe and probably drive himself to drink by hearing Aron Ra say that.
Are huge, and the literature out there is expansive. So when you
It
say
really
that, it is
is.
by definition a particular theory of mind. So you choose a particular theory of mind that is not in any way uncontroversial, and you say that this particular theory is by definition what we're going to link the term mind to. That's very philosophically unsophisticated, if I can put it like that.
Correct. He's right on the money. I mean, it's one thing for Aron to say, look, this is the position I hold and let me justify it. Great. This is the theory of mind that I justify. I tend to what's called property dualism. I kind of deny source dualism. But again, I'll give reasons for that if I need to one of these days, but that's my positions, right? But I'm not saying it's by fiat. I'm not saying it must be this way. There's no other possibility. That's what Aron's saying. He's not just taking a position and saying, this is how I view things, right? He's just saying, by definition, this is the case, which is, Abdul nails it. It's very philosophically naive. Throw a dwarf for 2 Australian, the smallest ant can lift the biggest truth. That's kind of profound, man. Is that an Australian saying? Because I haven't heard that before, but it's profound.
Because there are a lot of other
Thank you for that, throw the dwarf.
theories of mind out there that can preclude the idea of a brain existing, or at least they don't necessitate the reliance on a physical structure. So the problem here is that you want to skip over a whole bunch of philosophy. You want to bring your materialistic presuppositions to the table, and you want us to provide you with evidence based on your presuppositions without us questioning them whatsoever. And I think that's kind of contradictory with the idea of you being a skeptic. I mean, you should be skeptical about your views, right? We should question everything. We should be reasonable about our views. And I think with what you've presented here so far, you shouldn't be very confident about your views, because these views should form the foundation of your atheistic belief and the foundation of your rejection of God. And to be honest, to be quite frank with you, if the foundation of your rejection of the idea of a necessary being is this flimsy, then honestly, I really don't know how far we can go in terms of providing you with evidence, because it doesn't seem like you're going to accept any kind of leeway in terms of how we're going to...
Yeah, once again, Abdul makes a great point. I mean, if your reasoning of your justifications are bad, we're going to go with that. I mean, the people that I know that believe God doesn't exist, they usually have pretty sound justifications for it. I happen to be a big fan of Dr. Graham Oppy, as people know. He has really good arguments, I think, for why God doesn't exist. They're rational, they're coherent, and people can use them. And if they are convinced by it, great. They can use them as justifications, right? But I don't think Aron has ever read Oppy. I don't think he would even understand what a proper justification for his beliefs would be, because I don't think Aron is justified to make the claims that he's making. I don't think he's justified to make the claim that God's impossible. I don't think he's justified that he has knowledge that no gods exist. I don't think he's even justified that his belief at this point. I just don't. So Abdul makes a good point there.
Move forward with this.
I'm going to have to jump in. I'm sorry. I've been really trying not to interrupt. But when absolutely every single thing you say and your assumptions about my position and the things that you think that I said when I said the opposite, when everything you say about what I've said is wrong, absolutely every assumption you've made has been wrong and already corrected before you made the assumption, I don't know what to do with it. How do I let you jump to all of the wrongest conclusions you can imagine when I've already corrected them and you assume the opposite anyway? I don't know what to do with that.
All right. That's a straight script. And sometimes this works. I mean, Aron has been right when he said this before with certain creationists, because this is what he's used to. Creationists do this to him. None of these guys have done that to him. None of these guys have strawmanned him. None of those guys took what he said and changed it. None of these guys have been corrected on anything that Aron's position. That, what he just said right there, to me is absolute, just pure, empty rhetoric. It's script. It is absolutely script. And it's depressing to me that Aron has been so conditioned to just bloviate these things out, regardless if this is actually the case. I mean, he's just throwing, and I see atheists do this all the time. You're straw manning me. Well, how am I straw manning you? Well, I don't know, but you are. What? No, if you claim that somebody is misrepresenting your position, you need to explain to them why you think they're misrepresenting your position. Because I got to tell you, I don't think anybody's going to watch this and think that any one of these guys is misrepresenting Aron. I really don't. Even if they are anti-theist, let's be intellectually honest here. Where do these guys misrepresent him? I don't see this at all.
I'm sorry.
Can you tell me what I misrepresented you in? Because I don't want to misrepresent you.
I want to do something that I don't want to do. I should interrupt and tell you, no, I don't want to do that.
So I apologize. I apologize if I misrepresented you, but if you could just explain what I misrepresented your views on, and I'll be happy to retract it.
Okay, well, I wasn't taking rapid notes about when you said that I want to do the thing that I don't want to do. I don't
He wasn't taking notes. He can't even explain to them what they misrepresented him on. Oh, good grief. Now you know why I was losing my mind when I was watching this the other day. I mean, I was like 30 some odd minutes in. I'm like, oh, this is killing me here. You know, like 30, 40 minutes in. Yes, aneurysm is coming. Aneurysm incoming. You're right. Scarecrow. This is what's called scarecrowing. When somebody just throws out, hey, you're straw manning me. You're straw manning me. That's called scarecrowing. Yep.
remember what everything was that you were telling me that I was. All of the assumptions that you were making, no, there was too many too fast. And
the gist of my point. The gist of my point was that you're bringing materialistic presuppositions to the table that you don't want to be
bringing materialistic presuppositions.
Yeah, you're coming forward with a materialistic theory of mind, and you're saying that mind is by definition this theory of mind.
Okay,
right.
the common definition of mind. Yes.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. You don't believe in magic, do you?
That's the problem. Yeah, I don't. Okay. If there was a thing like magic, then at least we would have something to base a god on, because gods are made of magic. So in order for a god to exist, we have to have some magic, right?
So how do you define magic?
The supernatural.
Okay,
supernatural miracles. Miracles and magic have the same definition.
So so we're saying, okay, magic doesn't exist. I agree with you. Magic doesn't exist. Now you're saying magic is supernatural. Let's say, for example, you've got a naturalistic being, yeah, a human being, and he whips out a rabbit out of a hat. Yeah, is that magic? Would that be false?
There's a saying among the skeptics that real magic is false and fake magic is real.
Right, so it's fake.
So
what he's doing is
pulling the rabbit out of the hat, that's the fake magic. That's the one that's real. But the real magic is false.
Okay, so in terms of the person who's pulling out the rabbit from the hat, yeah, and you're saying it's not magic. The reason why it's not magic is because there's a naturalistic explanation, a materialistic explanation. Yeah. So you're saying in essence that magic would be that which doesn't have an explanation for it.
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to kind of diverge with these guys from. I really don't think that I know what they're trying to do, and I think that their argument here is misplaced. I think they're trying to take it from Aron's perspective, and I'm going to give him a little bit of charity on that. But I don't necessarily think that magic is something that is, oh, well, it doesn't have an explanation. If you don't have an explanation, it's magic. That's not a really good way for me to express what I mean by magic, right? And Aron just takes magic and supernatural and puts them as synonymous with each other. They're the same thing, magic or supernatural. And theists obviously don't do that, right? I mean, a theist can say, look, there's no such thing as magic. Witchcraft doesn't exist. Some of them might think that it does exist, but it's from Satan or some, demonic forces. But they differentiate that, right? And so Sharif is trying to just say, look, if something doesn't have an explanation, it must be magic. And he does this for a reason, because of the argument from contingency. He's trying to lay the groundwork where if there's a brute fact for something that has no actual reasoning that we know of, then that would be the same as magic. And that's what he's laying that groundwork for. And I disagree with him on that, because I tend to brute fact when it comes to the argument contingency. But I think that the brute fact would be something more along the lines of, there might be an explanation, but we just don't have epistemic access to it. It's outside of our abilities because of maybe our biological or physical being, that if there is some kind of grounding in truth, something that is the ultimate reality of what satisfies principle of sufficient reason, then we just may not be able to actually obtain that and know about it. That's what I mean by brute fact. And what he's trying to do is he's eliminating one of the three trilemmas for the argument from contingency of a brute fact, because if it's a brute fact, it's just magic, right? So let me just real quick cut to the chase. On the argument from contingency, there's three things that are posited as far as why something does exist, why there's contingent things that exist. Either there's an infinite causal line of contingencies, this contingent thing is based upon this contingent thing, based upon this contingent thing, and that also applies to epistemic justifications. It's called the dilemma of inferential justification, that you justify this, and you justify this belief, and you justify this belief, but you have to either have an infinite regress of justifications, or you can appeal to foundationism or coherentism or infinitism to try to get out of that. But he's arguing right now that the first argument, or the first thing for the argument contingency of infinite regress, he just says by fiat doesn't exist, but we'll get into that. But the second one of brute fact, he's trying to argue, well, if it's the second one, it's just the same as magic. And then he's trying to argue that the third one, which is a necessary being, must exist. So it's either have infinite regress, infinite causation, right? Or infinite causation leading to some kind of contingent thing, which is a brute fact, or a necessary being. I don't know which one it is. I don't think you can eliminate any of them, to be honest with you. I think all three of them don't satisfy principle of sufficient reason, which we'll get into. But this is what I think Sharif is trying to argue, is that he's trying to eliminate infinite regress. He's trying to eliminate contingent cause, which would be a brute fact, leaving just the third one, which is a necessary being, which is the point of this discussion, right? Is there a necessary being? So I don't begrudge him for it. I just don't think he does a very good job in eliminating those first two, but we'll get into that.
The way I like to illustrate this is, if there was a supernatural, then there would be, at some point in history, people like Hermione and Gandalf and Obi-Wan and Spock who would be able to demonstrate those powers reliably, repeatedly. And it would be such that even if science could not explain them, there would at least be a there. We can show that Gandalf really can do this thing, and Hermione really can do this thing with her wand, and we see that these things happen, and they really do happen. And in which case, faith healers would be working in hospitals and that sort of thing, and prophets would be correct sometimes.
No, I understand what you're saying, Aaron, but what I'm trying to understand is how you define magic. How do we define this particular magic? Because I think it goes to the heart of epistemology. How do we understand what we know? So what you're saying is that magic doesn't exist because if you have an event that doesn't have an explanation, or at least as a non-materialist explanation, that would be something that's quote unquote magical, and therefore something that wouldn't exist. Is that how you're understanding it? It's not just the fact that it breaks the laws, the known laws of nature. It's the fact that it has no laws to govern its coming into being.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I mean, the concise definition would be the magic and miracles, miraculous magic, magical miracles, whatever. They're the evocation of supernatural forces or entities to control or forecast natural events in ways that are inexplicable by science because they defy the laws of
by science again. But if magic does exist, maybe there are laws of magic, right? I don't believe that, obviously, but arguendo. If there's certain laws out there that are metaphysical laws that we are unaware of, maybe, right? And people talk about the multiverse. There might be laws in the multiverse that are beyond just our physical laws, right? We talked about a little bit about the fine-tuning argument on Agree to Argue with Dr. Vazrana, Dr. Hugh Ross, and Dr. Paul Davies on this very thing, right? There might be some kind of metaphysical law outside, and I mean, in this particular case, I mean like meta laws, right? Like not just laws that describes our universes, but meta laws that describe multiverse, physics, right? So there might be rules that something that magic will have to abide by. I don't think so, obviously, but he just kind of just equates, if God exists, it's magic, and I don't think that's a good argument.
Physics making them physically impossible.
Okay,
but
so
if there was magic, then you could use magic to make things happen, and we'd be able to verify when somebody used magic to make something happen. There'd be repeated demonstrations and that sort of thing. There's a way to show that there's actually a truth there, even if we can't explain it, even if there's no scientific explanation possible for that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying,
and I don't disagree with Aaron on that. Look, I think magic is BS. I don't think magic works. I mean, as a matter of fact, a lot of people have now started talking about terms like chaos magic or psychological magic, which a chaos magician, from what I understand, doesn't necessarily say there's a supernatural component, but it's just the will, it's just the thought, it's just the act itself causing things to become. Okay, whatever the hell that means.
So let me give you an example of this. In the stars in galaxies, the ones that are on the edges of galaxies, they orbit at the same speed or faster than the stars that are closer to the central mass, the supermassive black hole. Yeah. Now, according to the theory of gravity, that completely contradicts that theory of gravity, because the stars on the edges of galaxies should be slower. If it's not slower, if it's going at the same speed as the stars towards the closer to the central mass of the galaxy, they would break its orbit. Yeah. So that's something that breaks. What's that?
That's not an orbit. I've seen the models of galaxy movement, and it's not that way. And it's not an issue of their orbits. They don't orbit it. I mean, when everything is rotating together, it's not an orbit.
Okay, they're moving, the rotation.
All right, so what he's basically trying to describe is if I have to guess, probably Kepler's third law, right? So the Kepler's third law basically is a relationship to the semi-major, the square of the semi-major axis. No, wait, the square of the period is equal to the cube of the semi-major axis. Okay, so as a planet sweeps around the sun, right, the period squared is going to be proportional to the greatest distance, which is just your semi-major axis. So in astronomical units. So he's saying that in the galaxies, the outside stars are not behaving like we'd expect them to be around the galaxy itself, and that's absolutely true, right? It doesn't seem to work the same for a solar system as it does on a gravitational scale, and so they posited something called dark energy dark matter for that. And all that's saying is that, look, the only thing we know that affects orbital mechanics is mass, because mass is the only thing that can create gravity, right? So there's something there that has mass that we cannot see. It's dark. It doesn't have any photonic emissions. We're going to call that dark matter until we figure out what the hell it is. Okay. So, and by the way, this is not a younger creationist argument. They're not younger creationists. This is how they basically try to explain orbital mechanics of the stars on the peripheral edge of these galaxies, because they're not complying what we understand from Kepler's laws of orbital motion. Okay.
Together,
Yeah,
but
and
the ones at the
there's
edge
no
of the universe.
violation against gravity there, and even if there was, but there's not.
No. So there's two things, isn't it? There's two things. They've made these observations. So there's two things that they could use, and this is what I'm trying to say about the issue of magic. Yeah, why we don't appeal to it. The first way to interpret the data is to turn around and say that our whole theory of gravity is completely wrong. We need to rechange it, in order to incorporate this new observation. That's one way to solve the problem. The second way to solve the problem is to posit a form of matter that exists, that exhibits gravity, but we just can't see it.
Right.
Dark matter. That's pretty much where the current science is. So what they're doing is
Fortunately not. Right now, and this is recent, so that's why you wouldn't know about it. It was just days ago that somebody's just got $100,000 grant to pursue a physical theory that replaces dark matter, or the need for dark matter, with I'm not into physics, so I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's a subatomic particle that, instead of being massless, is now taken to have a small amount of mass and can somehow.
Yeah, well, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's talking about dark quarks and dark gluons. When I listened to this, I tried to look up what he was talking about. The best I can come up with is dark gluons and dark quarks, but that is a form of dark matter, right? So dark matter is either baryonic or not, and there's comprised of protons and neutrons, or it's not. There might be some other type of exotic matter it's comprised of. And some people were positing it was black holes at one time, but it's something that has some sort of mass, right? Because mass is the only thing that we know that affects gravity. Whether it's baryonic or not, whether it has nucleons or whether it has protons or neutrons or some completely different type of particle, we don't know. They just don't have information of what is causing these gravitational anomalies. They do know that it has to be mass, unless there's something completely foreign to us that causes gravitational effects that is not based upon mass, right? So I don't know what Aron really thinks he's trying to accomplish here by saying, oh, no, new theories out there just discount dark matter. No. Because even the newer theories still have to have some kind of mass, right? I mean, dark gluons and dark quarks, and quarks are what comprise the nucleon. So a proton would be, and neutrons would have two up, two down, or two down, one up spin, and then two up and one down spin. And then inside those nucleons, you have gluons holding the quarks together, right? Then you have the flavors of the gluons and the colors, which is red, green, and blue. But they have to have some kind of mass to them, right? They have to have something that is causing those gravitational perturbations and gravitational effects that we're seeing on these edge of these galaxies that don't comport to what we would understand the same for a solar system, right?
Account for the former necessity of dark matter.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter in terms of the particular explanation or theory or model that they propose to explain this. What I'm trying to show is that when it comes to our observations as human beings, what we do is we think that the universe operates according to comprehensibility, something that's comprehensible. And so if we see an event, we seek an explanation behind the event. If we don't have an explanation behind the event, we call it magical, and therefore we dismiss it because we dismiss magic. I.e., there has to be an explanation behind things that we observe within the universe. This is what I'm saying. So I'm saying I agree with you, Aron, in terms of saying that magic doesn't exist, and that if we see some sort of event within the universe, we look for an underlying explanation for it. Yeah. So I agree with you on that. So, and I agree with you that we cannot therefore come to a conclusion about something that exists, some event that has no underlying explanation for its existence within the universe. Yeah. This would be something that we'd dismiss out of hand. So, for example, if the magician literally gets a rabbit out of the hat with no explanation, we dismiss it. Yeah. We in fact, we wouldn't say literally is taken it out of the hat. We would just simply say, no, there is an explanation. It's just that maybe we don't know what the explanation is. Yeah. So we look for explanation behind things.
So we can call something unexplained. And when scientists call something unexplained, the believers translate that as explained by God.
No, we're not saying.
Yeah, I think that's a little disingenuous. I don't see a lot of theists doing that. Now, do I think theists do use God of the gaps? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think it's science. I mean, I'm going to be talking about the upper level kind of theist here. Most of them aren't going around, we can't explain this by science, therefore it must be God. I don't know if that's really what I see very often. Maybe some of the lower level theists out there. We can't explain this, therefore God. But obviously that is the God of the gaps, right? But I think that they're all correct on this. That as far as science goes, science looks for explanations, right? Science is the discipline of looking at a natural observation, a natural phenomenon, and saying, how do we naturally explain this, right? Because we do all agree that science adheres to methodological naturalism. Now, some may even go further and says they think they should go to ontological naturalism, but the term methodological naturalism only came around in the 80s or something. I think it was 83, give or take. So it's a relatively new term. But I think it's more descriptive, because science, I don't think, really goes out there and says by fiat you cannot have supernatural. What they say is we don't allow supernatural causations because we're looking for a non-supernatural explanation of something, right? So science basically wants to adhere to some form of the principle of sufficient reason, to the degree as they want to be able to explain things. And by the way, the PSR is not just one thing; it's a whole group of things. And I don't think Aron really understand the nuances of the PSR, because he could actually get a lot of this just by denying some aspects of the PSR, but he doesn't.
Anything which is explained by God, nothing like that. But what I'm trying to show is this: is we don't just use observations. Rather, we have logical axioms, in order to understand and interpret those observations. So whether it is dark matter or this new fundamental theory of particle physics that explains why the orbits of the rotations of stars around galaxies, the speed that they're at, whatever it is, what we're saying is that on the fundamental layer of these observations is an explanation that causes it to be the way it is. And therefore, as human beings or scientists, we try to seek out an underlying explanation. So I'm saying is that you have observations here, you have logical axioms as well, and you bring them both together in order to interpret the data. So in this situation, this example, what you're using is something called the principle of sufficient reason. You're looking at reasons behind our observations as a presupposition or an axiom or logical axiom to interpret data.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into the whole details of PSR because it's very, very, very complicated. But generally speaking, the PSR is just basically says for any fact, there's an explanation for that fact. Okay, in a nutshell. However, there's different types of PSR. There's the strong version, there's a weak version, there's modalities versions, there's factive versions, there's regulative versions. And so there's a lot of different versions of what the PSR would be. Right now, I particularly don't subscribe to any kind of strong form of the PSR. Because I tend to brute fact, right? I think that we have brute facts we may not ever be able to epistemically grasp, right? It doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a necessary being, or might be, but the brute fact is we have no idea. We might just never be able to even have information about a brute fact that exists, that from all contingency flows from. And so, and by the way, the brute fact doesn't satisfy PSR. Infinite regress doesn't satisfy PSR. And this is where they're kind of going with this. If you have an infinite regress of contingencies, doesn't satisfy PSR because it doesn't explain anything. Okay. If you have a brute fact, it just is what it is. It just happens to be a fact that we don't know why. You're not explaining anything. Doesn't satisfy PSR. I agree with that. So then they're like, well, if you accept the PSR, the only thing left is a necessary being. And they would be right on that if you accept a strong form of the PSR, I think. I don't at all. Do I think there's some regulatory PSR? Yeah, okay, whatever. But they're trying to say there's like one size fits all. And since the first two don't fit PSR, therefore there must be a necessary being. This is the way they're going with him. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you agree upon that, then
and he agrees with this.
Okay. It's not just scientific data that we're looking at. Yeah, it's not just empiricism. There's something that's more fundamental than empiricism. There are logical axioms, which is where we get into philosophy now. Yeah, so there's philosophy out there, and this is one of those logical axioms is this thing called the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason, which states that any observations that we have within this universe requires an explanation for why it is the way it is. So the question then becomes: what is it that we seek an explanation in? Yeah, why do we seek that explanation? For example, if I had a red triangle, I would seek an explanation why it's red, but I wouldn't seek an explanation as to why it's got three sides.
Right. Okay. So let me kind of break this down. He's saying that a triangle is a triangle by definition, or that's three sides, right? So you're not going to go out and try to explain why does a triangle have three sides? Well, it has three sides because we've defined it to be that way, right? There's nothing to explain there. It's analytically the case in the subject and the predicate. I know by the definition of a triangle, it has three sides because that's the mathematical definition. You don't go out looking why the triangle has three sides. You might want to find out why it's red. What made it red? Okay, there's a condition there to be had of what made it red. But what makes it a triangle is a fact that it has three sides. That's an analytical thing. That's the distinction he's making. But I think it's interesting to note, because he's talking about the PSR. When we're talking about the PSR, there are certain things called a regulative version of the PSR, which is basically saying what is regulatory for us as a condition of intelligibility to exist. This goes back to the whole law of non-contradiction thing, right? The law of non-contradiction, law of identity. These are the fundamental axioms of what we understand to be reality, the classical logic. Those are regulative as opposed to factive, which is something that's basically a factive is, okay, this is a fact that's true in all possible or possible in all possible worlds. It's true essentially in our actualized world, right? So a factive thing of the PSR is this is true in our possible world, which is an actualized world, or in maybe even all possible worlds. So there's different scopes of the PSR. There's scopes that can just say, look, I'm going to limit the PSR just to explain ontological facts. Why does this cup exist? Right? I can limit the scope. So it's not one size fits all. It's a group of positions. But if you accept a strong version of PSR, which, there might be an argument to be had that science kind of does. Science wants to explain everything, right? It says if something happens, it has an explanation, which, again, I don't necessarily think it holds because of quantum mechanics and things like spontaneous fission and weak nuclear decay. Those things do not have explanations. I think they're effects without causes. And so I think that just kind of craps all over the PSR, personally speaking. But I deny the PSR. So I'm like, yeah, well, you know what? Infinite regress, brute fact, and metaphysical necessity or necessary being. None of them will actually satisfy the PSR anyways. So that's how I would kind of go about this argument.
Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, so in the definition
What doesn't make sense?
of a triangle,
What doesn't make sense about that?
But in the definition of a triangle, it doesn't have to be red.
Object can be triangular, in which case I'm going to want to know why that thing has 3 sides.
Okay, but see the distinction Aron's making in his head? He's saying, hey, I'm walking along the beach and I see something that is 3-sided. I want to know what made it 3-sided. That's completely different from what Sharif's saying, is that if you don't have to go observe why or discover why a triangle has 3 sides. There's a difference between why a triangle has 3 sides and finding an object that has 3 sides of why that object has 3 sides, right? Those are completely different things. Am I mistaken here? Am I way off base here? Because I think they're talking about completely different things. I think Aron's arguing, hey, I found this object. It has 3 sides. I want to know why it has 3 sides. Is it erosion? Is it wind? Is it aliens? Is it intelligence? What causes to have 3 sides? And Sharif's going, no, look, I mean, if we see something that's a triangle, we know it's a triangle because by definition it has 3 sides. We don't set out to say why it is a triangle, right? It's a triangle because it has 3 sides.
No, I think Sharif is talking about stuff that are analytically true in the sense
analytically
that something
true,
is
right?
True by definition. So if a triangle is by definition has 3 sides, then you're not going to seek an explanation for why a triangle has 3 sides. I mean, it's just the explanation is within the definition, right? It's analytically true.
Yeah, in this last 8 minutes now, I'd love to hear why you guys believe, because nothing you have spoken about so far is the reason you believe.
Well, and this is why I think it's very disingenuous of Aron right here. Now, granted, I don't come to the same conclusions with any of these 3 theists. I'm not a theist, right? Obviously, I have a very different perspective than all 3 of them. But all 3 of them are trying to explain to them why they believe. They're laying the foundations. And Abdul said from the very beginning, let's find commonality. Let's get the terminology. Let's explain our position from the bottom up. And I think they've done a very good job of that so far. And Aron just goes, no, you guys haven't explained why you believe. Well, he's not listening then. Now, he doesn't have to agree with them. I don't. Yeah, I think there's obviously ways of signaling these things. But he's not listening to why they think they're justified to believe that God exists, especially, I mean, they haven't even got to Islam yet. But that's not, they don't have to even get to God. All they're trying to get this point is that a necessary being exists, right? That's all they're trying to get to, which again, I don't subscribe to. Is it possible? Of course. You know, I don't know what's the case. I don't know if it's infinite regress or continuous brute fact or necessary being. There's arguments to be had, right? But they're leading him, based upon Aron's own statements, to the only option he has. is a necessary being by his own words. And he contradicts himself. So, yeah, spoilers.
And you
Well, first thing,
what makes you believe? Why would you want to?
Yeah. So first thing that we've established is that you can't be really a hard atheist.
No, we have not established that.
To say that. The second thing.
Yeah, that's why I think Sharif is smuggling something in. I don't know where he pulled that out from. I don't understand where he gets the idea that you can't be a hard atheist. I don't know where he gets that from. I don't know where that came from. I'm going to call him out on that. I don't know what the hell he was talking about. How anything he thinks doesn't justify being a hard atheist. Okay, so I think that was just kind of out of the blue. Again, live chat, let me know.
That I think we've also established is that it's not just empiricism that's sufficient for us to come to certain conclusions. We also need logical axioms.
And I agree with that second part of his, by the way.
First thing. So the first thing you've actually established, because the first thing you said you established, you hadn't established.
Okay, but at least you accept that you need logical axioms. You need philosophy. The reliability of the data is only going to be reliable based upon the logical axioms that you have. Like, for example, the principle of sufficient reason.
I don't deny that philosophy has value. It does. And I wish that philosophy was taught in high school, though you would really want to control how that is taught because it is so grossly misused by religious apologists.
Yeah.
So, well, like atheists don't as well. Again, let's throw this out there. I've seen lately more atheists misuse philosophy than I have theists. Again, and that might just be on me. I don't go out looking for theists because I'm not a theist, and I don't. The theist arguments tend to bore me because I've seen them a million times. But I see atheists all the time misusing philosophy. They throw out misunderstandings of straw man argument. They throw out misunderstandings of appeal to authority. They throw out misunderstandings of ad hominem. All these fallacies they misunderstand. Aron's philosophy is wretched. I'm telling you, you find me one philosopher that's willing to go on air that thinks Aron has really good understanding of philosophy. I want to talk to that guy. I want to talk to that philosopher. I really want to talk to that guy. Matter of fact, Aron told me before, he's like, well, I know philosophers that disagree with you. Okay, that might be true. But did you tell them my actual positions? Because I know for a fact he strawmans me. And who are they? I'd like to have a conversation with them because maybe you didn't explain to them things right. Because I'm pretty solid in my logical arguments. I think if Aron could have assailed my logical arguments by now, he would have. With all the people that he knows that are the actual philosophers and PhDs, one of them probably would have given him a way to assail it. That hasn't happened yet. Now, again, that doesn't mean I'm true or right? I'm not making the argument I'm right because it hasn't been proven wrong. No, of course not. I think I'm right because this logic, and I think the logic's correct. But it's very disingenuous when Aron is just basically saying to these people, look, I want to get to this discussion about why you guys hold this particular belief, but everything you've just talked to me about your philosophy is irrelevant. Well, no, it's not. The philosophy is reasons why they hold this particular belief.
That's one thing that we've established. The second thing that I think is important to establish.
And yeah, by the way, to a second point, yeah, obviously I don't think evidentialism and empiricism and I'm not a strict evidentialist. I'd be maybe more of a moderate evidentialist. But I don't think empiricism is the only way to acquire knowledge. Of course not. He's so stuck in this scientific mode that only way to get knowledge is science. And the only way to get that is through empiricism and experimentation. That's so wrong.
As well is this idea, or the third thing, if you want to say, or second thing, the principle of sufficient reason, that things that we observe within the universe have an explanation for why they exist, because we dismiss this idea of magic. Yeah, so we dismiss, for example, if I turn around and I say something that begins to exist has no cause for its beginning, we dismiss that because that violates the principle of sufficient reasoning, and that then starts to adhere to this idea of magic, which we
yeah. So that's exactly what I said he was trying to do. He was trying to eliminate that second possibility of the argument contingency of a brute fact because he's equating it to magic. And he is right. It doesn't satisfy PSR. So what? I don't think any of them does.
We disagree with, which I agree with you on that. So the next point, I think, and this is where the argument is building up, the next point is, on what basis do we apply the principle of sufficient reasoning? And I'm saying, when we look at things which are possible in a possible state, yeah, but they're actualized. So let's say there's an actualized possibility. As an example, you have a red triangle. It could have been a green triangle. It could have been a blue triangle, yeah? Because it's red in particular, I'm going to ask the question, why is it red as opposed to any other color? I'm not going to ask the question, why has it got three sides? Because that's, as Abdul said, it's an analytic proposition. It is where the predicate is contained within the subject, yeah? Meaning its definition is by definition free.
All right, do you guys understand that? So the predicate is contained in the subject such that by definition the triangle has three sides. There's nothing about a triangle being red that's in the definition, right? If I hear the word triangle, I cannot conclude that triangle is red because it's not in the definition, right? That's what he's saying, and he's right on that.
Sides. But it's not by definition that it has to be red. So that's where I'm going to look for an explanation, and that explanation is going to be outside of the triangle or the existence of a triangle.
Right.
Do you agree? And that's how science generally works. Science looks at things which are possible existences that exist, and it tries to understand why, using this principle of sufficient reason, why it exists, and it looks for an explanation outside of the thing itself.
Can we agree that what I get from many apologists is the excuse that anything is possible? And I know of many things, and I could list many things that are not possible.
Oh, see, more empty rhetoric. He didn't address anything that Sharif had to say. And no, I don't think the theists actually posit that. I don't know any, well, maybe a handful of like really bad theists will argue anything's possible. God can do anything. Well, no, most theists nowadays, because of what's called the principles of eternal verities, God can only do what is logically possible. That's how they would posit it, right? So theists a long time ago had said to themselves, hey, look, if God can do anything, he can cease to be God, which seems to be contradictory, right? How does God cease to be God? He must exist. He's a metaphysical necessity. It would be a contradiction for him not to exist. And so they kind of posited, God can only do things that are logically possible, right? And so I don't know many theists going out there going, God can, do something logical impossibility by like stop existing or making a square circle. I don't think that's prevalent nowadays. Jamie Russell, $5. God done did it. Thank you, Jamie Russell. Appreciate that, my friend.
So can we agree that we cannot say that anything is possible?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, good.
So
what does that even have to do with anything? Nothing.
What you said, and you agree with what I said, so there we go.
Yeah. So what I would do is I'd list propositions into three general categories. Yeah, one is called logical necessity. Second one is logical possibility, and the third one is a logical impossibility. Yeah, a squared circle would be a logical impossibility. Yeah,
Agreed.
A logical possibility is what we do in science. We look for things which are logically possible, and we investigate the way that.
No, I disagree with that one, though. I don't think science goes out of way to find logical necessities. I think science goes out of its way to find nomological necessities. And a nomological necessity, again, like the laws of physics, right? What is the makes the laws of physics the way it is, right? And that, there might be some metaphysical accounting. This goes into scientific realism versus scientific anti-realism. But I don't think science really deals with logical impossibilities as much as physical impossibilities, right? Which are nomological.
That they are, and why,
or metaphysical sometimes, maybe,
the way that they are. Yeah. So when we look at an observation within the universe and we're saying, well, it requires an explanation, the explanation is not contained within itself, it's rather contained outside of itself. Yeah. Then we're looking for the explanation other than the thing itself. Yeah. Now this is going to lead to certain consequences. So one of those consequences is if the explanation itself for this contingent being, so contingent being basically means something that's possible, is another contingent being, then we need an explanation for that. And then you fall into a potential infinite regress.
Which is correct, but Sharif, for some reason, just by fiat, discounts infinite regress. And I think that's a mistake. Now, I think there's arguments to be had about why an actual infinity doesn't exist? Yes. The Grim Reaper paradox is a very good example of that. But he hasn't made any of those arguments. He's just by saying, look, he holds that infinite regress is impossible. But it really depends on the type of infinite regress. There's virtuous infinite regress and there's vicious infinite regress. And most of the time people would understand that a vicious infinite regress is negative, a virtuous is positive. And so a vicious infinite regress is probably something that is unfavorable, right? That's something that we don't want a vicious infinite regress. But that doesn't mean that an infinite regress that is virtuous doesn't exist. It's quite possible that there could be an infinite causal chain, right? It's shocks our mind, but no different than any other thing. I mean, whatever you end up with, whatever you think is the case, whether there's infinite regress or brute fact or a metaphysical being, you know, they all kind of like blow your mind, right? So there's no logical impossibility about infinite regress, although it is frowned upon. It is, you know, people don't want logical, infinite regress, but we do have them. You start with Peano's axioms, you're going to get an infinite number of real numbers, right? There's an infinite regression there of an infinity of real numbers. So infinities, in that sense, do exist, right? Do actual infinities exist? I don't know. Probably not. I think it's probably more likely they don't. Which, if that's the case, then the universe had a beginning, right? So,
do you affirm an infinite regress? Because I say that's a logical impossibility.
I don't know. I'm trying to think, because what very often comes up is arguments of cosmology, which is another topic that I don't even discuss. I don't
think it is an infinite regress, but I don't think it's possible.
I don't think that it's well thought out or well analyzed. Well, maybe it is well thought out given the data that we have, but we don't have a whole lot of data about it. And what we're talking about is what we've learned in the last century, and most of what we've learned only in the last half of that.
I understand what you're saying, Aaron, but the issue is that it's not about the particular model. Like, for example, the rotation of stars in galaxies. It's not about whether we have to change the theory of gravity, whether it's dark matter, whether it's this new particle that's in existence that explains why it is. What we're doing is we're seeing an observation. We're saying there is an explanation. There is an explanation for it. Now, what that particular explanation is, we'd have to investigate further. But what I'm saying is that if we accept that as a principle, then if we're saying these things which are possibilities, contingent beings, require an explanation. Now, either the explanation is going to be upon another thing which is contingent, which then requires another explanation, or it's going to be upon an explanation that's founded upon something that's necessary, which means it doesn't require any further explanation than its own existence.
Right. If it's necessary, it doesn't require an explanation, right? So he is very much incorrect in that. And there's only about, I think, 15 more minutes or 10 more minutes. So let me kind of cut to the chase here. So he's automatically eliminated the infinite regress by fiat, it seems. I don't think he makes an argument about why. He's eliminated brute fact because he's conflated that with magic, or equated it to magic, as Aron would understand magic. So that leaves a metaphysical being left, which, by the way, is what they're arguing here. Now, I will jump to the chase that I don't think, even if a metaphysical being exists, it has to be God, because that doesn't explain anything. Because if God does exist, he created this world, right? He actualized this world, which means one of two things. Either he created this world because he had sufficient reason or reasons to do it, which is explanatory of why he did it, something that was virtuous, something that made him do this way, right? Which by the way, would kind of make everything necessary. Because if he had to create this world, then it would be considered to be necessary. And if it's necessary, it doesn't require a reason, because things that are necessary do not require a reason. So if God created this world out of some kind of necessity, there's no reason for it, because there's none required. If he did it arbitrary, and he just, for whatever reason, wanted to create this because reasons, well, we don't know those reasons. We have no idea what those reasons even are. It doesn't explain anything either. So even if, by the way, they never do get to the God thing, but even if the necessary being exists and is God, God doesn't explain anything either way. Right? Because either he for some reason had to create everything by some kind of virtuous necessity, in which case doesn't require an explanation because it's necessary, or he created it by some kind of reasons which are unbeknownst to us, which doesn't explain anything. So that's what I'm saying. None of this stuff satisfies PSR to me, if you adhere to that way.
Okay, three-sided triangle. You don't ask the question why it's three sides.
All right, you've got 2 minutes left, and I apologize that we haven't gone anywhere with it at all.
I mean, Aron, what are you saying? You're leaving?
It's been an hour.
Oh, okay.
He sticks around for about 10 more
we're
minutes.
Limited to an hour, but I mean, I think we're getting somewhere. So, so it's sad that you have to leave. Maybe you can consider staying. I think the gist of what Sharif is saying, after you've committed to a principle of sufficient reason, you've accepted that everything has an explanation, and Sharif explained what contingent things are and how they have explanations external to themselves. You also accept logic. So, a logical entailment of that is everything in existence, everything that is contingent in existence has some explanation beyond it, and that explanation that is beyond it, by definition and by logical entailment, can't be contingent itself, because it's already an explanation of all contingent things. And by that, using logic, reason, and even empirical reality, because we observe contingent things, we've established the existence of a necessary being. Now,
by the way, this is all consistent. I mean, their positions are consistent. Boom, 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 boom. And Aron has been led down this path, hook, line, and a sinker, because he doesn't know how to assail any things, and he's just going to go with it. He doesn't have to give any pushback. He's kind of locked himself in a corner. If you really listen to this, he kind of just locks himself in a corner, saying that eventually there has to be some kind of metaphysical being, but then he kind of just completely says the opposite. So, I go for consistency. I don't have to agree with these guys because I don't take their premises. I don't take their axioms as far as their beliefs. And the positions on PSR and other things, but I like the fact they're consistent within their worldview. This is the one thing that I look for. I mean, it's very rational to be consistent in your positions, right? I mean, they're not throwing anything, they're not throwing these bizarre, outliers in, right? Everything they're saying, it does follow from what they're arguing. This is probably why they convince people that don't know philosophy very well. And I'm not saying they're going to convince Aron, but because they're very, very consistent, and I like that.
What do you have to say about that?
I like how philosophers try to define their God into existence.
But Aron, you agreed with every step that leads to.
By the way, earlier he tried to define God out of existence. So I think that's kind of funny. Where do we leave off here?
If we're saying these things which are possibilities, I contingent.
Yeah,
it's well thought out or well analyzed. Well, maybe it is well could list many things that are not possible.
I think, and this is where
where'd I leave off?
Places when we actually make some progress. So
where'd I leave
take
off
everything that exists that is contingent. The set of all existent things that is contingent, whether it is finite or infinite, doesn't matter. So the set of contingent things that has an explanation beyond it. So if we can conclude that the set of contingent things is contingent, of course we can argue for that. But just if that is assumed and it has an explanation external to itself. Sorry,
you threw all of that out and jumped to Magic Invisible Man.
No,
they haven't got to that point yet.
Right now, Aron, I don't want you to change definitions here. The reason we've made this discussion about a necessary being is because it kind of streamlines the discussion. We're not concerned with all the other properties. We can have a different stream where we discuss the other properties that we say God has. But in order to get somewhere, we have to kind of streamline the discussion and not keep jumping around to different places when we actually make some progress. So right now, everything in existence that is contingent, by your admission and by your concession, requires an explanation external to itself, because you've already said that everything requires an explanation. So if we can establish that a multiplicity of contingent things doesn't make it necessary, like for example, my laptop requires an explanation, 100 laptops requires an explanation, an infinite number of laptops also requires an explanation, and we take the set of all contingent things in existence and we say that it requires an explanation external to itself, by definition that explanation cannot be contingent, because we've already said that it explains all contingent things. Then we've established
that you jumped to God.
Again, that's disingenuous. They haven't got to God yet. They're just trying to explain a necessary being, right? And this is where, by the way, one of the things I would kind of bring up if I was, trying to refute them, is that I do believe in parsimony, right? And by the way, he had mentioned something very, he kind of touched on Occam's razor, which is basically entities should not be multiplied without necessity. And there's reasons why we would kind of go, look, these things are not parsimonious with our understanding of things, right? And if you have two hypotheses with equal explanatory power, you tend to take the one with less assumptions. Not always, but there's certain things by use of induction that you might have two competing hypotheses that the evidence for both might be exactly the same, right? I mean, I'm not going to get into it in detail, but go look up. They're called the riddle of induction, which talking about emeralds being green up to a certain date. And after a day, the hypothesis is that all emeralds are green until they either observe blue or a certain arbitrary date occurs. And so up to now, every emerald we have observed is green, which is evidence that all of them are green, or it's also evidence that they are grew, which is green and blue, that at some arbitrary time in the future, they all change to blue. All right, both the evidence is the same, for both hypotheses, but which one's more likely, right? Which one is more parsimonious? Which one is not considered to be more ad hoc kind of thing? And so I do love dealing with the theoretical virtues, which is a great thing that Oppie points out, dealing with how a scientific, and this is why I think that Aron would really be good at this if he understood the philosophy, that if you have a scientific theory, so what makes that scientific theory virtuous, it has parsimony, it has elegance, it has explanatory power, it has consistency, it has repeatability, it has simplicity. These are all things that we look for a good, robust, which is another theoretical virtue, robust scientific theory. And he could use this argument to say, because of that, God is not parsimonious. He could make some kind of argument for this. There could be really good ways that Aron, if he learned philosophy, could totally justify his position so much better. But he doesn't.
Necessary being.
Hold on a second. We didn't get there yet, Aron. We're just trying to figure out if we even agree on there being a necessary being. And then we could.
There's lots we could.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, if we come to an agreement that there's a necessary being, doesn't necessitate that it's God, but then, as you said, maybe in the future,
there's a necessary being.
What's that?
Less that it's God. So we have to get to that first assumption, which we haven't gotten to, and then that it is God, which we're not going to get to.
Okay, but Aron, can you
Okay,
explain which part?
Hold on, Abdul, please. So what I'm saying, Aron, is that we were trying to build an argument for the necessary being. You agreed to the principle of sufficient reason, so we're on the same page there. Then what we're trying to explain is we have all these different things that we experience in reality that are contingent, that require an explanation for them outside of themselves. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, do we get to a bedrock thing that is necessary that explains all these other contingent facts, or do we just keep going on ad infinitum with all these different contingent beings? The only two really possible options at this point is to say, well, there has to be some sort of necessary being that is the grounds and explains all these other contingent facts, or we just keep adding on more and more contingent facts ad infinitum, and we don't really get anywhere.
Or a brute fact. I mean, there's a third option there, but yeah, I mean, Jake's right. So
matter and energy are eternal, never created, and then we don't have this problem at all.
But then you would.
All right, so I'm going to stop this real quick. I'm going to put it on 2 times speed so we can get through this before next 20 minutes. I want to keep this down to 2.5 hours, which is amazing. I thought it was going to be longer because there's a lot to go over here. But see what he just said? That matter is eternal, which means it's necessary, which means it must exist. It means that it, first of all, wouldn't have an explanation if it's necessary. But he's just admitting right there's a necessary being. He's just calling it matter. Think about this. That's exactly, he has literally said matter is necessary. You cannot have, I mean, he argues that there is no such thing as nothing. He disagrees with Sean Carroll. Therefore, there has to be something which is necessary. He's just calling it matter. But that capitulates the argument that there's a necessary being. Again, live chat, what do you think about that?
But then you would say that matter and energy in that case would be necessary, and then you have a necessary being. It just happens to be matter and energy, right?
The reason being that it's not possible for there to be absolutely nothing.
And he doesn't disagree with this because he holds it's impossible to have nothing, which again I don't in any way agree with. But because he holds that position that there cannot be nothing, there has to be something, that in itself capitulates the argument there's a necessary being. He's just calling it mass. Okay, fine. That's the argument. Necessary being has ontology, right? That's where we said from the beginning. Something that has ontological presence. Mass, matter, energy has some kind of ontological presence.
Well, but I'm saying even in that equation, if you rejected an infinite regress and you said, well, the thing that's eternal is this matter and energy. Well, the question is that matter and energy that's eternal, is it necessary or is it a contingent fact? If you say that it's contingent, then it needs an explanation outside of itself.
Or if you say that it's necessary, then you agree with us that there is something that is necessary. You just think that it's matter and energy. And then we could have a discussion about that.
Jake nails it right there. Just absolutely nails it out of the park. He's absolutely right. And again, live chat and the people that watch us after the fact comment on that. You know, and again, I'm not one of those people to side with theists very often, especially, you know, I'm not a fan of Islam. But I'm not treating these guys as Muslim. I'm not treating them as Islam. I'm not even treating them as theists. I'm treating them right now as philosophers and people that know philosophy. Jake's spot on. You cannot take this away from him when it comes to this. And I think atheists do a disservice when they start thinking to themselves, oh, I'm arguing with a creationist, they must be wrong. I'm arguing with a theist, they must be wrong. I'm arguing with even a flat earther, they must be wrong. Hey, flat earthers get something right every now and then. It's rare, but it happens, right? But even if a flat earther says A equals A, you can't say, well, that's wrong because a flat earther believes it, right? And so, yeah, I mean, Jake just solidifies the argument right there.
Okay.
So, I mean, which one of those options would you, at this point, would you go with? Would you say that you think matter and energy is eternal but doesn't have to be necessary, and then we still have to figure out, well, what
if it's
explains
necessary,
that?
the only thing that makes it necessary is that it's not possible for there to be absolutely nothing.
Which makes it necessary
for there to be absolutely nothing, and that impossibility would make the existence of something necessary. And
Right. Okay.
none of it is relevant to what we're
Well,
talking.
no, it is.
It is relevant because that's the discussion. Is a metaphysical being, or is a necessary being, does it exist? That's the whole topic of the discussion. And Aron has just laid it out there. Yes, according to him.
Because we're using, as we described in the beginning, what being was. We're not restricting it to this sort of God with consciousness and all that stuff. We're not adding that baggage into the equation.
Mhm.
But
We can have another conversation about that.
we could. But before you go, I want to be clear on where we're leaving off. At this point, to me, it seems like you're agreeing that there is something necessary by the fact that you're saying you don't think that there could ever be absolutely nothing.
Correct.
And if that thing that is necessary is something like matter and energy or some configuration of it, then that, in terms of philosophy, would be a necessary being in that respect. We would disagree with that, but at least we would agree that there is something that is necessary, and then we could have a further discussion about which model best describes what should actually be considered necessary and what shouldn't.
Perfect.
Again, I don't deal with physics at all. And I know that Sean Carroll, although I would have said that it's impossible for there to be nothing, I know that Sean Carroll said that it is conceptually possible for there to be absolutely nothing.
And logically
So
possible.
with that being the case, that means that matter and energy, if never created, are not necessarily necessary. So,
But he disagrees with Sean Carroll. He is saying that matter is necessary. He is saying that it cannot be any other way. There cannot be nothing. There has to be something. There has to be matter. There has to be energy. He's arguing this. Now, again, I don't agree with him. I think matter and energy is contingent. But I'm not the one in this discussion. By Aron's own words, he has argued himself into a corner that there is a metaphysical being. He's just calling it mass and energy. And by the way, I have asked people to review this with me. I've asked people if they've watched it, and I have gotten feedback. I haven't had anybody disagree with this yet. So if you disagree with me or Aron on this, you think that Aron didn't paint himself in a corner, I want to know in the comment section after you watch this. Please tell me, because I don't see how he possibly could not have lost this any worse, because he completely, as Jake pointed out, he has said it cannot be any other way, which means it's necessary. So yeah, if you think that he didn't, please let me know. Also, let me know if you think that is exactly how we're viewing this, or I'm viewing this. If you think I'm right and that I'm viewing it that Aron completely gave away the farm right there, let me know. Okay.
But you would
We
disagree
agree,
with Sean, though, right?
we agree upon that.
Yeah,
We
but
would agree
my-
that sorry, Jake, really quick. We would agree that conceptually nothing is not impossible. So we agree logically that's basically we're saying it's logically possible for there to be nothing.
And I agree
It's
with
only
that.
logically possible for there to be something. So we agree upon that.
Well, I don't really fully understood him right there. He said something along the lines of that it's not logically impossible for there to be nothing, but it's only logically possible to be something. And I think that's maybe odd phrasing. I don't think that it's logically possible. It's logically possible that there only could be something, but that's not by necessity, right? And I certainly don't think that because there's something, the counterfactual to that there is nothing, can only be nothing, or can be nothing, isn't something that is logically impossible, right? I don't think that's the case. I think that there's nothing to me that shows logically there could be nothing. Right now, we basically think that way because of observations, right? But the whole adage, out of nothing, nothing comes. But again, that's an adage. That's not a rule. That's not a hard fast rule in physics. There's nothing in physics that prevents this. Nothing in logic that prevents this. We don't know what the properties of nothing would even be. We've never looked at nothing. We've never discovered nothing. We haven't observed nothing. We have no idea what the hell nothing even would be, right? So, and that's a hell of a metaphysical question. Is there such thing as nothing? If all the matter in the universe disappeared, if all the energy in the universe disappeared, and it's trillions and trillions and quadrillions of years from now, and all black holes have evaporated, and there's nothing left in the universe, is that even something even possible? Maybe at that point it's just quantum fluctuations again, and the whole cycle starts again, and the only thing that really is a metaphysical necessity is quantum fluctuations or something. And I'm just throwing that out there. But that would be metaphysical being, all right? I hope I pronounced this right. Chupa... I'm going to butcher this. Chupa Pika Chupalupa. Sorry, man, I butchered that. I'm going to call you Lupa for 10 euros. You mentioned property dualism. From what I briefly read, it seems to fall under physicalism. Yes, it means that basically you have physicalism, then out of that you have two types of properties. You have mental properties, you have physical properties, but they both fall under some type of physicalism in the mind-body distinction, which as far as I know is a branch of monism. Well, there's neutral monism. Yes, it's not a type of dualism. Is dualism quote dualism just a misnomer in that specified case? Thank you. The way I look at it, yes, and to me, and again, philosophy of mind sucks, and so I'm probably way out there in left field in this. I mean, because I don't have a problem with monism. I don't have a problem with neutral monism. I think neutral monism might be the way to go. I know a few people that subscribe to it, so I don't have a problem with neutral monism. But property dualism, to me, is not a form of dualism. It is a form of monism. It's just that means you have one physical thing, and then out of that, you have mental and then physical properties that come out of that. So I do think it maybe is more of a misnomer, but, ask a philosopher of mind that question, because God, philosophy of mind sucks. It's so hard. But yeah, that's the way I've envisioned it myself. So again, I like to have the foundations correct, right? I like to have the concepts correct. So if I'm wrong on that conceptually, love to have somebody go, no, Steve, you're really messed up on this. Let's look at this from this way. I love when people do that. So if I'm completely hosed on that, let me know.
What Jake was saying is that, look, what we're coming to the conclusion is that you've got contingent being here. Contingent being requires an explanation. Either it has another explanation, which is another contingent being ad infinitum in a series of contingent beings and a chain that goes back forever, or there's a necessary foundation, a necessary thing within reality. Now,
the necessary thing could be the eternity itself.
We agree with you, and that's what
that might look. The universe might be necessary, right? Everything that might be necessary. Okay, whatever. But he's still capitulating that there seems to be, in Aron's mind, a necessary being that exists.
We're agreeing with you, Aron. Right now, we're just trying to decide if there's anything necessary in reality or everything is contingent. If we could get to a point where we agree that something has to be necessary, even if we don't know what it is, then we could have a further discussion about what the necessary being would be in terms of examining it and things like that. But we can't skip the step, because if we don't even agree that there's a necessary being, then it makes no sense to skip that step trying to go through this process.
Okay. So if you want to have another discussion, I mean, I could be open to that, but I certainly don't want to delve into this because I don't see where it goes anywhere and it's pointless. There are a lot of other things we could talk about. So
this is very unfair. I mean, like I said, these three guys are explaining their positions from the ground up. Got to respect that. It's consistent. Do I agree with them? No. Do I think their argument is good? No, but I've heard these arguments before. I know the argument from contingency. Well, it's been around a very long time. And I have no interest to go into it. Look, more power to Aron. He's got balls, right? I mean, I give him props. I don't think I can go in with these three guys and hold my own. I just don't. I would be telling you the same thing I'm saying now. But these guys are really pros at this. I'm telling you. But they just ran circles around Aron. I mean, there wasn't even any understanding of the topic from Aron. And then for him to say, well, we're going to talk about it as a necessary being, something that has to exist, and then explain to me why you think this way. They explain to them why they think this way. This was not productive. I mean, come on.
Concepts to me, and maybe I can come back.
Well, we progress here, Aron. I think this was fruitful because at least we answered the question. I mean, this normally doesn't happen. So the title of the stream is "Does a necessary being exist?"
And the answer was no.
Well, I didn't
He completely contradicts himself. No. Well, wait a minute. About a minute or two ago, you're like, oh, something has to exist. There can be nothing. There can't be nothing. I disagree with Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll says conceptually there has to be something. I disagree with them. Therefore, something always has to exist. If something has to always exist, that's a metaphysical being that must always exist by necessity. There's a huge contradiction he just made there.
I think it's
don't
clear
think
from the
we're
discussion
giving
that
a
all
hard
four of
no.
us here agreed that
That
a necessary
the answer
being
is
exists.
no, that there is no necessary being.
There is
So you
something
don't think-
necessary.
wait,
There is
Being here
nothing
is
necessary. That's what we
Aron,
agree on. There's nothing necessary.
No, but Aron, do you think that it's possible that matter and energy could be that necessary thing?
Could be. Is it
Yeah.
possible that it could be necessary?
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
possible that it could be necessary. It's also possible that it could not be necessary.
Yeah, he just walked that completely back, right? He just walked it back because it was first, there must always be matter and energy. There cannot be nothing. These things that must exist. Now it's possible they're necessary. No, he's already said before by arguing that they're necessary.
And therefore,
Okay.
it's not necessarily necessary. So
Okay, but that's
no,
why
there
I'm
is
asking you.
nothing. The answer to the question is no, there is not a necessary being, and I'm now 10 minutes over time.
Okay, so you
Okay,
don't
sorry.
think that. Okay, all right. I mean, I'd be happy to have you back on because.
Yeah, but
I
when
mean,
if I come back on, I want to know why y'all believe what you believe. Not
Well,
Sure,
we're
but
explaining-
this is the
They're-
process.
they're
This is part of the
explaining
process. This is
that.
part of the process, Aaron.
You
And
are
we want to have you on for
children,
longer.
right?
We're explaining to you why we believe
Aye.
in certain things. So one of the reasons why we believe is because we believe in the principle of sufficient reason, not magic. Yeah.
There's
One
no
of the
way
re-
that you can get to Islam through this.
One of the
Oh,
ways,
there is.
one of the other
Definitely
ways,
not.
one of the things, one of the other reasons
And this
why
is
we
not
believe
how you got there.
why
This is absolutely
one
not
of the
how you
reasons
got
why, well, to be honest, Aaron, I don't think you've read any books, philosophical books written by these classical Islamic scholars on the proofs
we're
for
done.
Islam, because
right.
one of
I'm out. Thank you. We'll have
Okay.
another conversation another
Okay,
time.
good having you on, Aaron.
I
and it was a
appreciate,
good talk.
I quite enjoyed the discussion and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take
All
care.
right, so I'm going to leave it there. Wow. All right, let's recap a little bit. Yeah, I do think Aron majorly got destroyed in that particular argument. And, it is because Aron doesn't want to learn these types of subjects. Now, again, I'm just a layperson in these things. People know I'm not a philosopher. I don't have any expertise in philosophy. It's just something, it's a subject that I enjoy, that I read, and that I think I understand basically well enough to explain it to other people. That's it. That's it. I'm definitely no expert, and I'm certainly not a philosopher. I just like philosophy, and I like other subjects as well. But what I know about these topics seems to comport with my readings and seems to comport with the experts that I do talk with, which means a lot to me, because if I get something wrong, I want to be corrected on it. Aron has access to the same people that I do, right? We have a small circle. Even though Aron doesn't talk to me any longer, we still have access to a lot of the same people. And I'm sure he's been told these things before. I'm sure he's been corrected on these things before. I've watched it in real time happen. I mean, even with Dr. John Reynolds, he corrected him on all this stuff. But Aron doesn't want to fix his stuff. He's just fixated on his position that he cannot be wrong. He's even told me once, Steve, if you're right, my entire life's work is for naught. Those are his words about, the whole atheism thing. He's invested in it. He's heavily invested in it. He's heavily emotionally involved in it because of his scientism. And it's unfortunate because in science, I think he does a wonderful job. When he argues against creationists, these types of rhetoric techniques work. Okay, because let's put it this way. Most creationists we talk to don't know what the hell they're talking about. But of course, we have some really educated young creationists that, I know. They're not so easily manipulated. They're not so easily, defeated, because you got to understand the topic, right? And so I don't think Aron really wants to learn these philosophical topics, but he wants to talk about God, and he wants to talk about theology, and he wants to talk about ontology, and he wants to talk about existence, and yet he just doesn't want to learn any of the actual discourse on these things or read any of the literatures. And so I find it frustrating. And again, I'm not trying to shit on Aron Ra. I know some of his followers are going to come over and go, God, Steve, you really dislike Aron. No, I really do like Aron, believe it or not. I have a lot of respect for the man. He the foundational philosophy of creationism is brilliant. I think he does a wonderful job against creationism. But unfortunately, he misuses what he understands about science in the wrong domain. He tries to apply it in philosophy where it just doesn't work. It will never work. He has fundamental misunderstandings. He has a very poor foundation. And when you're arguing from a dictionary, you're automatically going to have a bad day. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Hopefully, like I said, I don't want to get too many hate people coming over going, God, Steve, you're just a mean poopy head. No, if you think I'm wrong, great. Explain why. Right? I like that when people say you're wrong. Let me explain why. I've had people come over and say you're wrong, and then they just throw out this nonsense. I'm like, well, that makes no sense. Here's the logic, and they say, well, no, you're just wrong because you're a poopy head. Those don't get very far. I usually delete those people after a while because I'm like, look, I'm done with this. And I'm gonna everybody who watches this, if I tell you I'm done with the conversation because you're just not being honest and you won't answer a straight question, don't respond back to me. You're just going to get blocked. I don't have time for it. I don't have the patience for it. And it's dishonest. I don't like dealing with dishonest interlocutors. I try to answer every question as honestly and directly as possible. If I have to throw in caveats, that's completely understandable. But when you are asked a direct question and you're talking about you're telling me that I'm wrong on something, or that I need to go look something up that I do think I fully understand, or at least understand superficially to a level to go, well, no, I think you're wrong on this. And it's logic. You need a little deeper reasoning to show that I'm incorrect, right? You can't just say you're wrong because of a dictionary. That's not going to fly. You come after me like that and say, look, Aron's right because of the dictionary. I'm not going to entertain that. It's just, why bother, right? So, if you guys watch this after the fact, let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think in the live chat right now as I wrap this up. I'll be ending in 2 minutes. I'll try to adjust some of the comments, but please leave me comments on this and promote this video. I suck at promoting. So if you got a YouTube channel, if you got a Twitter, if you got a Facebook, put this out there everywhere you want and give me feedback on it, and ask for other people to give me feedback on it as well. And that's theist, atheist, agnostic, whatever you are, give me your opinion on my review. If I hosed it up, I totally accept that. Correct me where I got things wrong. Totally, accept that. If you think I made some good points, I like to hear that too. I like to know some feedback on there. Because again, I only had 24 hours to prepare for this. And there's a lot of stuff to cover. Luckily, most of the stuff I was familiar with, so I didn't have to do too much, but still, it is work, preparing for these things. All right, so going through the things. Lord Brian says, when religious people have better understanding than formal logic, you got to give them credit. Yeah, no, that's fine. I have no problem with that. Does Liberty Honest says, you and I have had to deal with people like that on Facebook. Oh, yes. I don't know which is worth, Facebook atheist or Twitter atheism. I don't know. They're both pretty bad. And it's a shame because the atheists that I deal with that are my friends, they're really intelligent. They have really good reasons to believe there's no such thing as God. They've justified them. I mean, I don't know why people don't take cues and information and help from the people that really do understand these topics very well, much better than I do, that can give them really good reasons to justify their position, right? They don't get advice from them. They get advice from people like D-Jump or something. It's like, what? Josiah Hansen, $2 for another hour. I'm at work. I can't, brother. I appreciate it, but this is already 2.5 hours. So, find something to watch, but I appreciate it. But I do got to end this because I do want people to watch this, and I find it, if anything longer than 2.5 hours, they're probably not. So live chat, thank you guys for showed up. I just kind of noticed we had 100 people listen most of the time. That's actually very surprising. I thought it was gonna be like 20 or 30 because it's philosophy stuff. But if you're one of my mods, especially, leave me a comment in the section, because I know my mods really do know these topics. Let me know what you guys think as well. Okay, so with that, I appreciate this, guys. Again, not trying to give Aron any disrespect or not trying to shit on him. I hope one day maybe Aron and I can patch things up, especially that he knows that it wasn't me causing the contention as much as other people were, and that he was lied to by people he trusted, and I never lied to Aron at all. So, thanks, guys, for watching. Good night.